巴菲特在今年的年会上宣布退休。现在我把年会的问答内容整理后分享给大家。按照惯例，把内容分成4个部分：价值投资、行业和宏观判断、伯克希尔公司业务、人生智慧。字幕经过反复校对，还加上了一些关键名词的解释，同时把视频的速度提快了一些，希望对大家有所帮助。那我们先看第一部分价值投资的内容。第一个问题，提问者关心公司在日本的成功投资。他注意到日本目前的通货膨胀率接近 2% 的目标，以及日本央行与其他主要央行、美联储、欧洲央行在货币政策上的分歧。日本央行倾向于加息，而其他央行可能降息。因此他提问巴菲特如何看待日本央行的加息决策，以及这是否会影响伯克希尔对日本股市的未来投资或考虑获利了结。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的。
Well, I'm going to extend the same goodwill to Japan that you've just extended to me. I'll let the people of Japan determine their best course of action in terms of economics. It's an incredible story. It's been about 6 years now, as you pointed out. I was just going through a little handbook that probably had 2,000 or 3,000 Japanese companies in it. One problem I have is that I can't read that handbook anymore. The print's too small. But and here were these 5 trading companies that they have a special name for them in Japan, but they were selling at ridiculously low prices. And so I spent about a year acquiring them, and then we got to know the people better, and everything that Greg and I saw we liked better as we went along. So we got fairly close to the 10% limit that we told the company we would never exceed without their permission. And so we did ask them recently whether that limit could be relaxed, and it's in the process of being relaxed somewhat. I would say that I'll speak for Greg beyond me that in the next 50 years, and I hope he's running things then, we won't give a thought to selling those. I mean, Japan's record has been extraordinary, actually, in terms of that. My guess is that Tim Cook would tell you that iPhone sales there are about as great as any country outside the United States. American Express would tell you that they sell their product very, very well in Japan. Coca-Cola, that we do business with, another big investment of ours, they do extraordinarily well in Japan. They have a number of habits in a civilization that operates differently than ours. Japan is by far the biggest. This is the container they've always preferred for soft drinks, and they have a whole different sort of distribution system there. But we have been treated extremely well by the 5 companies. They talk with Greg primarily. I went over there a year or 2 ago. Greg's more cosmopolitan than I am, so he's which isn't saying much actually. But
very little.
But he is. I don't know. How many times do you think you've met with representatives of one company or the other?
Yeah, when you think of the 5, there's definitely a couple meetings a year, Warren. And I think the thing we're building with the five companies is, one, it's been a very good investment, but we are really, as Warren touched on, we envision holding the investment for 50 years or forever. But I think we also are building relationships to do incremental things with each of those companies. And we really do hope to do big things with them globally. They bring different perspectives and different opportunities, and we see, and that's why we're building that long-term relationship with them.
It's super long-term, and they have a bunch of they have different customs. They have different approaches to business. That's true around the world, and we don't have any intention in any way of trying to change what they've done because they do it very successfully, and our main activity is just to cheer and clap, and that I can still do at 94. So we will own those. We will not be selling any stock. I mean, that will not happen in decades, if then. And my guess is that they will find things, because they cover the world pretty much, the 5 trading companies. We will find things occasionally that may be very large for any individual company there. They may in some way be assisted by some help we bring to the situation. But that will be an expanding relationship. It's too bad that Berkshire has gotten as big as it is, because we love that position, and I'd like it to be a lot larger than it is. But even with the 5 companies they're very large companies, and they're large companies in Japan. And we've got at market that in the range of $20 billion invested, but I'd rather have $100 billion than $20 billion, and that's the way I feel about it. Several other investments we have, but size is an enemy of performance at Berkshire, and I don't know any good way to solve that problem, but Charlie always told me that having a few problems was good for me. I never quite understood that, but if you listened to him moralize, you would understand. And it's not an impossible problem at all. And the Japan investment has just been right up our alley. You want to add anything on that?
No, I think you've touched it, but as you said, it's right up our alley, and I absolutely agree, Warren. I do believe we'll see some very large opportunities long term, sure. and that's just been a great plus of that relationship.
Yeah, I would say they would like to present us with opportunities. We would like to receive them. We've got the money. We both get along very well with each other, and they have some different customs than we have. They drink the #1 Coca-Cola product they drink over there is something called Georgia coffee. I haven't converted them to Cherry Coke, and they're not going to convert me to Georgia coffee. But it's a perfect relationship. I just wish we could get more like it. And I never dreamt of that when I picked up that little. It wasn't so little; it was about that thick. But sometimes 2 companies to a page, and a couple thousand pages, I believe. But it's amazing what you can find when you just turn the page. We showed a movie last year that about turn every page, and I would say that turning every page is one important ingredient to bring to the investment field. And very few people do turn every page, and the ones that turn every page aren't going to tell you what they're finding. So you got to do a little of it yourself.
下面的问题是关于耐心。提问者指出，巴菲特经常强调投资中的耐心。他问，在巴菲特的投资生涯中，是否也曾有过需要打破耐心原则，快速行动反而带来好处的例子？对此，巴菲特是这么回答的。
That's a good question. And there are times when you have to act fast. In fact, we made a great deal of money because we're willing to act faster than anybody around. Jessica Toombs I think she's the stepdaughter or step-granddaughter of Ben Rosner, a manager of ours. And in 1966, I got a call from a fellow named Feldsteiner in New York, and he said, I represent Mrs. Annenberg. And there were actually 9 Annenberg sisters, I believe, before Walter Annenberg came along as the son. But he said, we have a business we'd like to sell you. So I called Charlie up, and I got a few details, and it sounded very interesting. And Charlie and I went back to the office of Will Feldsteiner in New York, who was a marvelous guy. Never met him since, but he was handling things for Mrs. A. Simon, but her name was Annenberg, and her husband had been the partner of Ben Rosner, but he had died, and Ben got kind of tense about working with her, and so he offered us this business at a bargain price. He offered us a business for $6 million. It had $2 million in cash. It had a $2 million piece of property in the 900 block of what's the key street in Philadelphia down there, Market Street, and it was making $2 million a year pre-tax, and the price was $6 million. And Charlie and I went back to this place, and Ben Rosner was there, and he just was upset about doing business with his partner's widow. She was extremely wealthy, and he wasn't enjoying it. He was very nervous about selling it, and he said to me and Charlie, he said, I'll run this business for you until December 31st, and then I'm out of here. And I got Charlie, we went out in the hallway, and I said, if this guy quits at the end of the year, you can throw away every book on psychology you've ever read. And so that began we bought the company and had a great relationship. And did I know that morning when I got a phone call from Will Feldsteiner that did his background about it? I've had a couple of times, and that was one of them, where people in the East felt that they had a stereotype in their mind of what people from the Midwest were like. And Ben had been married. His first marriage was to a woman from Iowa, and he just figured that anybody from the Midwest was okay. And the trick when you get in the business with somebody, you get in a room with somebody like that, and they want to sell you something for $6 million that's got $2 million in cash and a couple million in real estate and is making $2 million a year. You don't want to be patient then. You want to be patient then, waiting to get the occasional call. My phone will ring sometime, with something that wakes me up. I may be sleeping in there or something, but you just never know when it'll happen, and that's what makes it fun. I mean, so patience. It's a combination of patience and a willingness to do something that afternoon if it comes to you. You don't want to be patient about acting on deals that make sense, and you don't want to be very patient with people that are talking to you about things that will never happen. So it's not a constant asset. It's not a constant liability to be patient. Greg, you.
Well, Warren, I was going to add, as you're being patient, I happen to know, and I think that goes for Ajit also and all our managers. We're very patient when we're looking at opportunities, and as you touched on, we want to act quickly. But while we're being patient, never underestimate the amount of reading and work that's being done to be prepared to act quickly. Because we do know, be it equities, but I would include a variety of private companies, that when the opportunity presents itself, we're ready to act. And that's a large part of being patient, is using it to be prepared.
Yeah, and of course, it doesn't come in anything like an even flow. I mean, it's the most uneven sort of activity you could get into. And the main thing you have to do is you have to be willing to hang up after 5 seconds, and you have to be willing to say yes after 5 seconds.
Absolutely.
And you can't be filled with self-doubt in the business. You just forget it. It's going to work. Go into some other activity. But you also, I mean, one of the great pleasures, it is the great pleasure actually in this business, is having people trust you. And that's really why work at 90 when you've got more money than anybody could count. If they started today and having machines that are helping them and everything else, it means nothing in terms of how you're going to live or how your children are going to live or anything else. But both Charlie and I, we just enjoyed the fact that people trusted us, and they trusted us 60 years ago or 70 years ago in partnerships we had. And we never sought out professional investors to join our partnerships. Among all my partners, I never had a single institution. I never wanted an institution. I wanted people, and I didn't want people that were sitting around and having people present to them every 3 months and tell them what they wanted to hear and all that sort of thing. So, and that's what we got, and that's why we've got this group here today. So it's all worked out. But it's you don't want to be patient when things are going your way. When the time comes to act, you want to get it done that day.
下一个提问者假设美元在2025年将迅速贬值，询问伯克希尔是否采取措施对冲这种货币风险以及其对财报的影响。另一位股东则补充提问，指出伯克希尔目前介入日元以对冲其日本股票投资的货币风险，并询问未来是否会无对冲的投资外币资产。对此，巴菲特是这么回答的。
Yeah, well, we always have, pretty much. The Japanese situation is different because we do intend to stay so long with that position, and the funding situation is so cheap that we essentially have attempted to some degree to match purchases against yen-denominated funding. But that's not a policy of ours. In fact, that's the first time we've done that, and we've owned lots of securities in foreign currency. So. We do nothing in terms of the question about its impact on quarterly and annual earnings. We don't do anything based on its impact on quarterly and annual earnings. I mean, there's never been a board meeting I can remember or the conversation I had with Charlie where I say, if we do this, our annual earnings will be this, and therefore we ought to, whether it's accounting or anything, we just, the number will turn out to be what it'll be. What counts is where we are 5 or 10 or 20 years from now, and if you start focusing on what number you're going to produce, you will quickly get tempted, at least based on the experience I've seen from viewing 20 companies. You'll, one way or another, play around with the numbers, and sometimes seriously play around with the numbers. And I've seen people that I trust them in all kinds of other ways, but they regard playing around with numbers as perfectly okay. And that's just not something, we just don't think about that. So actually, the yen relationship of the yen, behavior of the yen in the last quarter, resulted in certain gap charges, but it doesn't make any difference. It'll change next month or next year, and obviously we wouldn't want to be owning anything that we thought was in a currency that was really going to hell, and that's the big thing we worry about with the United States currency. I mean, the tendency of a government to want to debase its currency over time is, there's no system that beats that. You can pick dictators, you can pick representatives, you can do anything, but the people, there will be a push toward weaker currencies, and of course that is, I mentioned very briefly in the annual report that the fiscal policy is what scares me in the United States, because it's made the way it is, and all the motivations are to doing a lot of things that can cause trouble with money. But that's not limited to the United States. It's all over the world, and some places it gets out of control regularly. As they devalue at rates that are breathtaking, and that's continued. I mean, people can study economics and you can have all kinds of arrangements, but in the end, if you've got people that control the currency, you can issue paper money, and you will, or you can engage in clipping currencies like they used to do centuries ago. There will always be people. It's the nature of their job. I'm not singling them out as particularly evil or anything like that, but the natural course of government is to make the currency worth less over time, and that's got important consequences. And it's very hard to build checks and balances into the system to keep that from happening. And we've had a lot of fun here in the last, either the first 100 days or the last 100 days, whatever you want to call it, watching what happens when people try to make sure that they aren't running fiscal risks. And that game isn't over, and never will be over, in finality. If you look up in search the great inflations of post-World War II, it's just a list that goes on forever, and the same names keep popping up and everything. So the value of currency is a scary thing, and we don't have any great system for beating that. We do in this particular Japanese position, because we expect to hold it for 50 or 100 years or more, and we will be owning something that's denominated in yen and easily predictable, and we'll just, as long as the carry on it is right and everything, we'll attempt to issue Japanese denominated liabilities, but that's not because of anything we carry about in terms of quarterly or annual earnings. Greg, do you have anything to say on that?
I was just going to say that, relative to the question, that there's no question we were fundamentally very comfortable with investing in the 5 Japanese companies and recognizing we're investing in yen. The fact we could then borrow in yen was almost just like a nice incremental opportunity. But we were very comfortable both with the Japanese companies and with the currency we would ultimately realize, i.e. in the yen.
Yeah, we only made, as I referred to earlier, one big currency play, which was connected a little bit with when I wrote that article for Fortune, and we got long 12 other currencies, as I remember. Only like 4 or 5 of them were really big currencies. But when I say we got long it, that means we're short the dollar. And so we held that position for a couple of years, and we made several $1 billion on it, which was significant to us then, still is. Charlie always felt that if he had to pick an area outside of stocks in which to invest, and he knew a lot about bonds, he knew a lot about real estate, he knew a lot about a lot of things, but he said he thought he could make a lot of money out of being in foreign currency. But we've done it once. It's not inconceivable we would do it again, but it's unlikely. But there could be things happen in the United States that would make us want to own a lot of other currencies. And I suppose if we made some very large investment, European country or there might be a situation where we would do a lot of financing in their currency. But it's not it was something that just was sort of obvious to do in the Japanese situation, where we had the ability to borrow yen at very, very low carrying costs, and we felt very good about the income we'd be receiving from these securities, and if the present condition, which it won't, I mean it never does, but prevail for decades and decades, we would probably keep doing the same sort of thing. But things change in the world too, so don't take that as a prediction.
下一位提问者来自蒙古，他介绍了蒙古国的情况， 提到蒙古最近在纽约举办了投资者会议，旨在吸引像巴菲特这样的机构投资者。他接着提出了核心问题：巴菲特会给像蒙古这样的新兴市场、政府和商业领袖什么建议，以吸引机构投资者？他还询问伯克希尔是否有长期投资新兴市场的计划，无论是作为对冲还是机会性投资。最后，他还邀请巴菲特的人到蒙古参加今年的经济论坛。对这样的邀约，巴菲特自然是委婉拒绝。
Yeah, I have trouble planning a trip to Council Bluffs, which is just a few miles from here, but it takes an optimist. Actually, I met a fellow here at the annual meeting, probably 20 years ago or more, who did a lot in Mongolia, and he did very well in Mongolia, and actually moved there for quite a while. I would say that if you're looking for advice to give the government over there, it's to develop a reputation for having a solid currency over time. I mean, that we don't really want to go into any country where we think that there's a chance, a significant probability of runaway inflation. It's too hard to figure. Other people figured out ways to make money in hyperinflationary situations, but that's not our game, and I don't think I'd play it well. So we wouldn't be. That would be a factor with us. The chances are we won't find anything in Mongolia that fits our size requirements aside from that. But like I say, I think my friend that I met here 20 years ago has done very well in Mongolia. And if the country develops a reputation for being business friendly and currency conscious, I think that bodes very well for the residents of that country, particularly if it has some other natural assets that it can build around. I don't know that much about the minerals there or anything of the sort, but who would have been on the United States in 1790? But we didn't have to have perfection. We just had to be better than the other guy for quite a while, and we started out with nothing, and we ended up with close to 25% of the world's GDP and faster growth rates and generally sounder currencies and all kinds of things. So I wish you well.
第一部分最后一个问题是，鉴于格雷格未来将负责资本配置，巴菲特认为对于一个企业经营者来说，转变为投资者更容易，还是对于一个投资者来说，转变为企业经营者更容易？对此，巴菲特是这么回答的。
It's a lot tougher to be an operator. It's easier to sit in a room like I do and play around with money. It's just an easier life. That doesn't mean it's a more admirable life. It doesn't, but it's actually been a pleasant life for me. So I don't complain in the least. And I've been able to choose my friends, which has made an enormous difference in my life. I've never had to work for anybody that I really didn't admire. That's a luxury in life. I had 5 different people I worked for, and they were fantastic. Whether it was the manager of the local pennies, which is it used to be located a couple miles from here, and newspaper managers, everything. I've never been really disappointed by any teacher I've had. So, but I would have to admit that I've been able to choose what I do with my day to an extraordinary degree compared to be a business operator. And in many cases, I wouldn't like to compete to be a top-notch business operator in terms of some of the behavior that might be forced upon me. I am the master. I've found myself in this position where I can run the kind of company I want to run, and that's an extraordinary luxury.
现在我们进入了第二部分，巴菲特对宏观和行业的分析判断。第一个提问者指出，巴菲特在2003年曾提出进口凭证的概念来限制贸易逆差，并承认其效果类似关税，但最近他又将关税称为经济战行为。因此，提问者想知道巴菲特对贸易壁垒的看法是否改变，或者他认为进口凭证与关税之间有何区别。这里要解释一下，进口凭证是巴菲特提出的一个概念，旨在解决美国的贸易逆差问题。 运作方式是这样的：美国的出口商在每出口1美元的商品时，就会获得等值的进口凭证，而美国的进口商在进口商品时，必须购买与他们进口商品价值等额的进口凭证。这些进口凭证可以在一个开放的市场中自由交易，出口商可以将他们获得的凭证出售给进口商。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的。
The import certificates were distinct, but their goal was to balance imports against exports, and so that the trade deficit would not grow in an enormous way. In fact, it would have, and it had various other provisions in it to help third world countries at that time, as they were called, to perhaps catch up a little bit. And they had a variety of aspects to them, but basically they were designed to balance trade. And I think you can make some very good arguments for the fact that balanced trade is good for the world, and the more balanced trade there is, the better. It will continue to be better for cocoa to be raised in Ghana, and coffee and Colombia, and a few things. And over time, the American industry has gone from being an agricultural country. This was nothing but an ag country. I mean, virtually, and that was only 250 years ago. And we have become a very industrial country. And we did not want to make that a situation, in my view, where we ran greater and greater deficits, building up greater and greater debts against the country. So I designed this import certificate thing, which Charlie thought was a little Rube, too much like Rube Goldberg. I don't know whether that name is, but it's gimmicky. But it's certainly a lot better than anything I think than we're talking about now. And there's no question that trade can be an act of war, and I think it's led to bad things. Just the attitudes it's brought out in the United States. I mean, we should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best. And I don't think it. That's what we did originally. I mean, we were good at producing tobacco and cotton 250 years ago, and we traded it. And we want a prosperous world with 8 countries with nuclear weapons, including a few that are what I would call quite unstable. I do not think it's a great idea to try and design a world where a few countries say, ha, 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 we've won, and other countries are envious. So my import certificate idea, which went no place, I think we've got extra copies, Rob. We've not a great demand for the copies. Anybody, and if you'd like, and write the office, I think we could probably send you a copy of it. But the main thing to do is not use, trade should not be a weapon. And the United States, we've won. I mean, we have become an incredibly important country, starting from nothing 250 years ago. There's nothing been anything like it. And it's a big mistake, in my view, when you have 7.5 billion people that don't like you very well, and you got 300 million that are crowing in some way about how well they've done. And I don't think it's right, and I don't think it's wise. I do think that the more prosperous the rest of the world becomes, it won't be at our expense. The more prosperous we'll become, and the safer we'll feel, and your children will feel someday. So that's. But don't expect my import certificate idea to go down there with Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations or anything.
下个提问者对房地产情有独钟，因此问为什么伯克希尔仍然偏爱股票而非更多的房地产投资。接着他提出了在当前高利率和全球不确定性的背景下，巴菲特是否仍然坚持别人恐惧时我贪婪的投资理念，以及价值投资是否面临新挑战。
Well, in respect to real estate, it's so much harder than stocks in terms of negotiation of deals, time spent, the involvement of multiple parties in the ownership. Usually when real estate gets in trouble, you find out you're dealing with more than the equity holder. But there have been times when large amounts of real estate have changed hands at bargain prices, but usually stocks were cheaper, but they were a lot easier to do. So Charlie did more real estate. Charlie enjoyed real estate transactions, and he actually did a fair number of them in the last 5 years of his life. But he was playing a game that, and it was an interesting game to him. But I think if you'd asked him to make a choice when he was 21, he had to either be a in stocks exclusively the rest of his life, or real estate the rest of his life, he would have chosen stocks in the second. There's just so much more opportunity, at least in the United States. There's so much more opportunity that presents itself in the security market than it does in real estate. And in real estate, you're usually dealing with a single owner or a family that owns maybe a large property they've had a long time. Maybe they borrowed too much money against it. Maybe the population trends are against them. But to them, it's an enormous decision. When you walk down to the New York Stock Exchange, you can do billions of dollars worth of business totally anonymous, and you can do it in 5 minutes. And the trades are complete when they're complete. In real estate, when you make a big deal with a distressed lender, when you sign the deal, then you go into another phase. I mean, then people start negotiating more things, and it's a whole different game. And a different type of person, to some extent, enjoys the game. We did a few real estate deals that came our way in 2008 and 9, but the amount of time that they would take us compared to doing something intelligent and probably better in securities, there was just no comparison. I mean, in a real estate deal, every sentence is as important to the person, and in stocks, if somebody needs to sell 20,000 shares of Berkshire or something, and they call us and the price is right, it's done in 5 seconds, and it closes all the time. The completion rate for working on anything in stocks is, assuming you've got a meeting of the minds on prices, essentially 100%. In real estate, it just begins when you agree on deals, and they take forever. So for a guy 94, it's not the most interesting thing to get involved in something where the negotiations could take years. We have the capability. There have been some huge failures in fact, if you go all the way back to Zeckendorf in the 1960s, he was going to change the world, and Century City out in California is a product of his. And if you go to Eurus, if you go to, he was sitting on top of the world with the Eurus buildings. And so people tend to get in trouble in that business. The banks usually don't want to recognize it, but that takes a long time to go through the bank processes. They just got through redoing the Musk loan that he did when he was buying it 3 years ago, the company that's now X. And, 3 years to work out a transaction that where you've got parties on both sides that aren't ready to act. We find it much better when people are just ready to pick up the phone, and you can do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business in a day. I've been spoiled, but I like being spoiled, so we'll keep it that way.
有人提出了一个关于美国经济前景和美国例外论的问题。美国例外论指的是一种认为美国在历史、意识形态、政治制度和国家发展方面在本质上与其他国家不同，明显优于其他国家，因此会保持长期繁荣昌盛的理论。提问者指出，巴菲特一直坚信美国经济的韧性和顺风，但当前美国似乎正经历剧烈变革，导致一些投资者开始质疑美国例外论。因此，提问者想知道巴菲特认为投资者是否过于悲观，或者美国是否真的进入了一个需要重新评估的根本性变革时期。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的。
America's been insignificant and revolutionary changing, really ever since it was developed. I mentioned that, we started out as an agricultural society. We started out as a society with high promises, and we didn't deliver on it very well. We said all men were created equal, and then we wrote a constitution that said blacks counted as 3/5, and in Article 2, you'll find male pronouns used 20 times and no female pronouns used. So, it took till 2000, 1920, I should say, till the 19th Amendment was passed, saying, oh yeah, we promised the women this back in 1776, and now we'll do something about it. And then we didn't do something about it for a long time. So we're always in the process of change. We'll always find all kinds of things to criticize in the country. But the luckiest day in my life is the day I was born. I was born in the United States, and at the time, about 3% of all the births in the world were taking place in the United States. And I'd like to say that I had something to do, so sent messages out to my parents, for God's sakes, move to the United States before I was born or anything. But I was just lucky. And I was lucky to be born male. I was lucky to be born white. And I was like all kinds of things. But if you don't think the United States has changed since I was born in 1930, we've gone through all kinds of things. And we've gone through great recessions. We've gone through world wars. We've gone through the development of an atomic bomb that we never dreamt of, at the time I was born. So I would not get discouraged about the fact that it doesn't look like we've solved every problem that's come along. And if I were being born today, I would just keep negotiating in the womb until they said you can be in the United States. So we're all pretty lucky. Don't want to give any. We've got 2 non-United States guys here just to get the other side.
Who now live in the U.S.
下一个提问者提出了一个关于近期市场波动对伯克希尔影响的问题。他指出，尽管第一季度伯克希尔现金增加，但4月份市场出现动荡。他想知道，这种波动是否为伯克希尔带来了投资机会，并特别提到了巴菲特曾暗示伯克希尔最近差点投资100亿美元，希望了解更多细节。巴菲特从来不会谈论可能或是正在进行的投资，因此对后一个问题他直接拒绝。
Well, I can give you a good answer to the second part, which is no. But 10 billion wouldn't have done that much. That's the other side. Another side of it. What has happened in the last 30, 45 days, 100 days, whatever you want to pick up, whatever this period has been, it's really nothing. There's been 3 times since we acquired Berkshire that Berkshire has gone down 50% in a very short period of time, 3 different times. Nothing was fundamentally wrong with the company at any time, but this is not a huge move. The Dow Jones average hit 381 in September of 1929. It got down to 42. So that's like going from 100 to 11. This has not been a dramatic bear market or anything of the sort. I mean, it was, like someone pointed out, if I've had 250 trading days a day, for however many years I've been old enough to trade stocks, I've got 17 or 18,000 days. There's been plenty of periods that just are dramatically different than this. I mean, when the day I was born, the Dow Jones was at 240. And that was August 30th, 1930. And between that and the low, it went from 240 to 41. I mean, so if people think that it made a really major change, it didn't. If it had gone up 15% instead of down 15%, people think they take that with remarkable grace. but if it makes a difference to you whether your stocks are down 15% or not, you need to get a somewhat different investment philosophy, because the world is not going to adapt to you. You're going to have to adapt to the world, and you will see a period certainly in the next 20 years, you'll see a period that will be in what somebody in the market described one time as a hair curler compared to anything you've seen before. I mean, it just happens periodically. The world makes big mistakes, and surprises happen in dramatic ways, and the more sophisticated the system gets, the more the surprises can be out of right field. That's part of the stock market, and that's what makes it a good place to focus your efforts if you've got the proper temperament for it, and a terrible place to get involved if you get frightened by markets that decline and get excited when stock markets go up. I don't mean to sound particularly critical. I mean, I know people have emotions, but you got to check them at the door when you invest.
接着，观众提出了一个关于大型科技公司苹果、谷歌、微软、亚马逊是否仍是轻资产理想业务的问题。他指出，巴菲特在2017年曾认为这些公司运营不需要大量资金是理想业务，但现在这些公司都在为人工智能投入巨额资本，所以提问者想知道巴菲特是否因此改变了对他们轻资产性质的看法。对此，巴菲特是这么回答的。
It's always better to make a lot of money without putting up anything than it is to make a lot of money by putting up a lot of money. And so a business that takes no capital to speak of, Coca-Cola, the finished product, which has gone through bottling companies and everything, that takes a lot of capital. But in terms of selling the syrup or the concentrate that goes to it, it doesn't take a lot of capital. So one is a fabulous business, and one is it depends where it is and everything like that. Coca-Cola is popular every place. But some places, if you're in the bottling business, it costs real money. You have real trucks out there, and you have all kinds of machinery, and you have capital expenditures coming up. And, we've got businesses that take very little capital, that make really high returns on capital. And the ones the politicians talk about as making high returns actually aren't making high returns usually in terms of capital. insurance, property casualty insurance is kind of a rare business because you need capital as a guarantee fund that you will keep your promises, but you can use it to buy other low-intensive capital businesses. I mean, you can buy you can buy Apple, and that would support that business. So that can be a pretty good business, and it's one of the reasons we've done well over time. Well, it'll be interesting to see how much capital intensity. Certainly there's more capital intensity going on with the Magnificent Seven than there was a few years ago. I mean, basically Apple has not really needed any capital over the years, and it's repurchased shares at a dramatic amount of reduction. Whether that world is the same in the future or not is something. Hollywood's answer was always to get their money from other people to put up the capital. A lot of people have gotten very rich in the country by essentially figuring out how to get others to put up the capital. And that's what people do in the money management business, and they get very, very rich because they get an override on other people's capital. And incidentally, if all of you were paying 1% for investment management fees at Berkshire last year, you would have paid $8 billion for managing, and you really wouldn't have had to do it. But investment management is a very good game because other people put up the capital, and you charge them for the capital, whether they do well or not, and then you charge them a lot more if they do well. I mean, it's a well-designed business for the people who practice it, and who can blame them? I mean, that is capitalism. But and I saw that in operation when I was working at Solomon, but I didn't need to see it. I knew what existed anyway. The trick in life is to get somebody else's capital and get an override on it. Charlie and I decided it wasn't too elegant a business after a while, but we were not criticizing the efficacy of it. It just didn't appeal to us after a while. I did it for 12 years though, or something like. Not really. The one difference that Charlie and I did from other people is we put all our own money into it. So we did share the losses with our own capital, but we got an override on other people's capital, and that's been. People have made advances where they get the override on other people's capital without putting up any of their own capital to speak of, and that's a very good business, but it can lead to a lot of abuse. Capitalism in the United States has succeeded like nothing you've ever seen, but what it is it's a combination of this magnificent cathedral, which has produced an economy like nothing the world's ever seen, and then it's got this massive casino attached. So you've got the cathedral and the casino, and in the casino, everybody's having a good time, and there's lots of money changing hands and everything, but the cathedral is what, got to make sure the cathedral gets fed too, because the temptation, and the temptation is very high now, is to go over to the casino where people say, we've got magic boxes and all kinds of things that'll do wonderful things for you, and that's where people are happiest, that's where you get the most promised to you, that's where the most money is for the people that are pushing things, and the balance between the casino and the cathedral it's very important that the United States in the next 100 years make sure that the cathedral is not overtaken by the casino, because people really like to go to casinos. And it's just so much more fun, and they ring bells and when you win, and they bring you drinks and everything else, and it's designed to move money from one pocket to another. But and in the cathedrals, they basically are designing things that will be producing goods and services for 300 and some million people, like it's never been done before in history. It's an interesting system we developed, but it's worked. It dispenses rewards in what seems like a terribly capricious manner. I mean, the idea that people get what they deserve in life, and it's hard to make that argument. But if you argue with it, any other system where it seems to work better, the answer is we haven't found one. So I'll leave it to the next generation to send me the answer by Ouija board or whatever. That works.
下一个观众提出了一个关于政府效率部对美国长期经济健康影响的问题，询问巴菲特是认为其净影响是积极的还是消极的。巴菲特没有直接回答，但是他对削减政府赤字自然是支持的。
Well, why don't you give me a hard one? I think that bureaucracy is something that is amazingly prevalent and contagious even in our capitalist system, and that big corporations, overwhelmingly, most of them look like they could be run better. I'm sure Berkshire does in many respects, and and government is the ultimate. So it really doesn't have any checks on it. And that's why it scares you to some extent about what the future of the currency will be, because they can print currency. And if you have people that get elected by promising people things, and that doesn't mean that they aren't sincere about all kinds of items, but there's no politician that says to anybody that, at least if they have money, that, I really think you have bad breath, and if you don't mind, would you step over away from me? It just doesn't happen. And so I think the problem of how you control revenue and expenses in government is the one that is never fully solved, and has really hurt dramatically many civilizations, and I don't think we're immune from it, and we've come close to it. But if you tell me how in a democracy you go in and really change things, we're operating at a fiscal deficit now that is unsustainable over a very long period of time. We don't know whether that means 2 years or 20 years, because there's never been a country like the United States. But you know that if something can't go on forever, it will end, to quote Herbert Stein, a famous economist. And we are doing something that is unsustainable, and it has the aspect to it that it gets uncontrollable to a certain point. I mean, essentially, you just give up on it. And Paul Volcker, kept that from happening in the United States. But we came close. We've come close multiple times, and we've still had very substantial inflation in the United States, but it's never been run away yet. And that's not something you want to try and experiment with, because it feeds on itself. So I wouldn't want the job of trying to correct what's going on in revenue and expenditures of the United States with roughly a 7% gap, when probably a 3% gap is sustainable. And then the further away you get from that, the more you get to where the uncontrollable begins. And I think that it's a job I don't want, but it's a job I think should be done. And Congress does not seem good at doing it. Well, we've got a lot of problems always as a country, but this is one we bring on ourselves. I mean, we have a revenue stream, a capital-producing stream, a brains-producing machine like the world has never seen. And if you picked a way to screw it up, it would involve the currency. And that's happened in a lot of places. And the incentives, plus the checks, well, there aren't any real checks. In theory, you would make it so there was substantial downside for anybody that screwed things up, but there isn't downside, there's upside. So it's the problem of the most successful company in the history of the country, in the history of the world. And at this point, we got a little room to go in solving them.
下一个是假设性的问题：如果巴菲特回到1776年，与本杰明·富兰克林一起为一个新国家奠定基础，他会倡导哪些核心经济原则，以建立一个公平、有韧性、机会驱动且能支持未来世代长期繁荣的资本主义社会？巴菲特是这么回答的。
That's a good question, but I would probably say to Ben Franklin, you just keep thinking and don't talk to me, because you'll come up with some better ideas than I will. He was an incredibly remarkable person. I mean, you would say he's almost probably the last person to almost have a grasp of every aspect of activity in the country. He invented all kinds of things, and he, incidentally, we were talking about power of compound interest and that sort of thing. He left a will that left a sum of money to Philadelphia and another sum to Boston that would serve as an example for a couple hundred years, of the power of compounding and all kinds of things. I mean, he was so far ahead of his time that the best thing I could do if I was under that tree with him was to get out of his way and let him just keep thinking. But he saw the problems that success could bring to a society, as well as other problems. I mean, more immediate problems that in all kinds of fields. But the problems of how to take 8 billion people, because there's no way we can separate ourselves from the rest of the world. We can be an example to the rest of the world, and I think it behooves us, since we have had all this good fortune in this country, and we do have a pretty good system. I don't think you get very far by lecturing the world on how you are the one that should tell them what they should do with their lives. I think I think you get a certain amount of resentment when just a few hundred years ago, a whole different group of countries were running the world, and now you start giving them advice. And I think it's a real mistake in communication or in persuasion to lecture a bunch of people where you've just won the game. I mean, but anyway, I would say that I would advise Ben to figure out how to win the game and keep a certain amount of humility at the same time. And I would tell him to try and design a system that doesn't invent too many things that can destroy the planet, that become uncontrollable once you get them out there. There was no alternative to us developing the atom bomb, but the expansion of the number of people that have the ability from 1 to 8 and 9 probably pretty soon with Iran. I mean, that's a mistake that society just could not afford to make. I mean, solving the problem with 9 variables instead of simply 1. Now, it's totally understandable. My dad was in Congress when the atom bomb was first used. It's amazing how Sam Rayburn kept the House of Representatives uninformed, because they were supposed to appropriate all the money, and he had 435 congressmen there, and they had no idea they were appropriating money for Los Alamos, or what was going on in Chicago, or what was going on in Tennessee. But anyway, we do have a society that is far beyond anything that Ben Franklin dreamt of. It's achieved it's moving toward, in the right direction, toward solving some problems where we made kind of broad declarations about all men being created equal and et cetera, and then we did some of the things we did. But generally speaking, we moved in the right direction. But we face problems that I don't know how Ben Franklin would attack the problem of what you do once you get weapons of mass destruction in many hands, and when you essentially look at the world as something where there are winners and losers, and that the winners are, humiliate the losers and do all kinds of things. But I'll let the people that are a lot younger figure out the answers on that. But it's still the most wonderful. There's never been anything you could dream like what has happened in the United States. So it's the best place and the best time to be alive by miles in history. Just think of a couple hundred years ago and somebody, yanking out a few of your teeth and pouring whiskey down you. I mean, and the subsistence, and particularly in this Midwest, just imagine waiting until the Missouri froze over every year just to see whether you could get your wagon across and maybe have a pregnant woman in the back. It's just amazing what has happened of a positive nature during my lifetime. And then the question is how do you keep it and how do you improve it? And I do think that fundamental to all of it, though, is having a currency that does not get debased. What that does to the stability of a society where all the people that trust their government get screwed, and all the people that figure out ways to profit off of it become rich or richer. I don't think you want a society that operates in that manner. So anyway.
下一位提问者是来自纽约州的护士，他描述了自己作为医务工作者在获得良好医疗保险方面的困境，以及纽约州医疗保险系统令人困惑和难以应对的特点。他想知道巴菲特与摩根大通和亚马逊合作的医疗保健公司最终失败的原因，以及巴菲特是否会考虑再次参与美国医疗保险改革。巴菲特对此的回答显示了他对美国政治复杂性的理解。
Yeah, we're spending close, it's hard to get the precise figure, but close to 20% of GDP on health. And if you go back to 1960, there were a number of countries that were each spending around 5%. And then the lines began to diverge dramatically. But the mathematical fact that there are only 100 percentage points in the equation didn't change. So we tried that experiment with J.P. Morgan and Amazon, and we had 3 people that didn't think they knew the answer, but thought that, in my case, I used the term that it was a tapeworm in the economy, and we also found out that the tapeworm was alive in every part of the country. I mean, the hospitals liked it. The hospitals had prominent people working with people. People generally liked their doctor, but didn't like the system. I mean, all kinds of things. But in the end, JP Morgan and Amazon and Berkshire were not going to have any effect on changing that 20%. Now that 20%, there are only 100 percentage points available, and when other countries spend 6 or 7% and perhaps use our system to their advantage, which is also very true. That is an enormous percentage of an economy, and we simply, it was too entrenched to really do much in the way of change. And we spent some money on it, and we did some work, and we learned a good bit about our own systems. And we saw the degree to which the present system was ingrained in so many people's, whether the healthcare providers or whether everybody, and these aren't evil people. I mean, they're just going about something and trying to save lives. But we found that whether it was in Canada or France or Britain or wherever it might be, that if you looked at our costs, that they were just far higher, and to some extent we were subsidizing the rest of the world, and people would come to the United States to do the really unusual or challenging aspects of health in terms of operations and that sort of thing. But we made no progress. And there comes a point where, well, the government's, it's so involved in the situation, and health is so important to everybody. And we couldn't, well, as I said to Jamie and Jeff, I said, well, the tapeworm won. And there are problems of society when you get 20% of your GDP going into a given industry. The degree of enthusiasm for changing that industry, the political power that the industry will have, and that doesn't mean they're evil. It's everybody, they just end up there. And so I don't know we came to the conclusion we didn't know the answer, three of us, and we had the money to do it, and we didn't know how to change how 330 million people felt about their doctor, felt about their health care, what they felt entitled to, and it won't change by itself. And government is the only one that can change it, and the only people in government that can change it are getting a majority of 435 people and 100 people. And my dad lost one election in his life in 1948, and he was a very strong Republican. And in 1950, he went back and beat the guy that beat him in 1948, and he got the doctors behind him. And he did they're very well, and they believe 100% in what they're doing. They're helping people every day. And during the pandemic, the sacrifices made by people save other people, just incredible. Can you imagine working in something where they're bringing in people that are going to die by the dozens and dozens and dozens, and you try to somehow keep your own morale up and keep working with them? So you can't argue about the importance of it. But our costs are so different than any country in the world that it's a huge element. And we're a very rich country, so we can do things other countries can't do. And through our elected representatives and a whole variety of things over time, we've developed a system that is enormously resistant to any kind of major change, and it's important in every community that it's in. So I wish we had an answer for you, but I was somewhat pessimistic going in, and I was a little more pessimistic when we came out. But I'm glad we did what we did, and we learned something about our own failings in the process. So Berkshire, in effect, got its money's worth, but we didn't kill the tapeworm. Okay, trying to change things in government it's an interesting proposition in the country because you get self-selection in terms of the people that go into government and continue in it, and to some extent, they have to make decisions that they don't like as they go along, and they learn to accept them or to rationalize them or whatever it may be. But it's still about this country's worked out better than any country in the world. So you can't argue it was a failure, but you can't argue that there are certain problems that are terribly tough to figure out ways to solve. And of course, one of them gets back to the fiscal problem I mentioned before, because it's easy to spend money and it's hard to cut people's receipts. And if you get elected, you're going to say to yourself, well, I can do more good if I stay in than if I really vote my conscience on this sort of thing. So you give away a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there, and finally you don't recognize yourself in the mirror anymore. And I grew up in a political family, and I watched how people behaved, and they behaved like human beings, which is what you have to expect. And I behaved like a human being. So we still manage to keep moving forward in a dramatic way. It's so much better to live here than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's dramatic. So you can't say the system's a failure, but you can say that it's very difficult to make major changes in it.
好，现在我们进入第3部分，对巴菲特公司旗下业务的讨论。第一个问题是，伯克希尔目前持有的现金和短期投资超过3000亿美元，远高于历史平均水平，简直相当于持有美国国债市场近 5% 的份额。他想知道，除了保险业务的流动性需求外，高现金储备是否是出于对高市场估值而采取的去风险策略，或者是否是为了给未来的领导层格雷格提供更大的灵活性和干净的开局。还有另一位股东的问题，询问巴菲特是否期待能有非常好的投资机会出现。
Well, I wouldn't do anything nearly so noble as to withhold investing myself just so that Greg could look good later on. Now, if he gets any edge when I leave, I'll resent it. So the amount of cash we have is we would spend. We came pretty close to spending $10 billion not that long ago, for example. But we'd spend $100 billion. I mean, and those decisions are not tough to make. When something is offered that makes sense to us and that we understand and offers good value and where we don't worry about losing. And the one problem with the investment business is that things don't come along in an orderly fashion, and they never will. I mean, it isn't like every day. The long-term record is sensational, but that is not a product. And I've had 200 trading days times 80 years. I've had 16 million trading days. And we kind of, 16,000 trading days. It would be nice if every day you got 4 opportunities or something like that, and and they were expected to be equally attractive. If I was running a numbers racket, every day would have the same expectancy of that I would keep 40% of whatever the handle was, and so the only question would be is how much we transacted. But we're not running that kind of a business, and so we're running a business which is very, very, very opportunistic. And Charlie always thought I did too many things. He thought if we did about 5 things in our lifetime, we'd end up doing better than if we did 50, and that we never concentrated enough. So that we would rather have, if we've got $335 billion now in treasuries, we would rather have conditions that are developed where we would have like $50 billion or something like that. But that just isn't the way the business works. And we have made a lot of money by not wanting to be fully invested at all times. And we don't think it's improper, actually, for people who are passive investors just to make a few simple investments and sit for their life. And but we made the decision to be in the business, so we think we can do a little better than that by behaving in a very irregular manner. But if you told me that I had to invest, let's say that we have roughly $40 billion a year coming in, and we start with 335. If you told me I had to invest $50 billion every year till we got down to $50 billion, that would be the dumbest thing in the world to invest in that manner. Things get extraordinarily attractive very occasionally. The long-term trend is up. Nobody knows. And I certainly don't know. Greg doesn't know. Ajit doesn't know. Nobody knows what the market is going to do tomorrow, next week, next month. And nobody knows what business is going to do tomorrow, next week, or next month. But they spend all their time talking about it because it's easy to talk about. And but it has no value. I've never found anybody I want to listen to on the subject. And on the other hand, I've found that leafing through things like that big Japanese book that I can't read anymore, that's a treasure hunt. And every now and then you find something, and occasionally, very occasionally, but it'll happen again. I don't know when. It could be next week. It could be 5 years off, but it won't be 50 years off. We will be bombarded with offerings that we'll be glad we have the cash for. And it'd be a lot more fun if it would happen tomorrow, but it's very unlikely to happen tomorrow. Very, very unlikely to happen tomorrow. But it's not unlikely to happen in 5 years, and then the probabilities get higher as you go along. It's kind of like death. I mean, if you're 10 years old, the chances that you're going to die the next day are low. You have to be 115 or something like that. It's almost a cinch. Particularly if you're a male. I mean, all the records are held by females in terms of age. And I tried to get Charlie to have a sex change so he could test out whether... He did pretty well for being a male, I'll put it that way.
下一个是关于人工智能对保险业影响的问题。提问者关注人工智能日益增长的能力和复杂性如何影响保险公司评估、定价和转移风险的核心职能。他还想知道这种变化是否与伯克希尔过去在承保或资本配置方面所经历的重大变革有相似之处。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
There is no question in my mind that AI is going to be a real game changer, and it's going to change the way we assess risk, we price risk, we sell the risk, and then the way we end up paying claims. Having said that, I certainly also feel that people end up spending enormous amount of money trying to chase the next new fashionable thing. We are not very good in terms of being the fastest or the first mover. Our approach is more to wait and see until the opportunity crystallizes and we have a better point of view in terms of risk of failure, upside, downside. So right now, the individual insurance operations do dabble in AI and try and figure out what is the best way to exploit it. But we have not yet made a conscious, big-time effort in terms of pouring a lot of money into this opportunity. And my guess is we will be in a state of readiness. And should that opportunity pop up, we'll be in a state where we'll jump in promptly.
Yeah, and I would just add, I wouldn't trade everything that's developed in AI in the next 10 years for a G. So if you gave me a choice, gave me a choice of having $100 billion available to participate in the property casualty insurance business for the next 10 years, and a choice of getting the top AI product out of whoever's developing it or having a G making the decision, I would take the G any time.
下一个问题是，在伯克希尔旗下众多公司中，有一家芝加哥的热狗公司，他想知道巴菲特是如何判断这家公司适合伯克希尔的投资组合的。对此，管理层都不知情，因此在巴菲特讲话的时候，格雷格迅速做了调查。
Well, I'll have to ask Greg about that because I don't know anything about it. So maybe he bought it when I was looking the other way, but
I think I got to call a friend on this one.
Yeah, we own a lot of companies, but I do like to think I know most of them. But it may be a subsidiary of a subsidiary in some way, but I really don't know anything about it. I'm sorry. That may be a good thing. I do know something about hot dogs, though. So,
and we do have a lot of companies in Chicago, Warren, through Marmon. And that's been a great opportunity where we've accumulated a variety of excellent companies under that portfolio. But as you noted, I don't believe Portillo's falls under that.
Yeah. No, I look at the financial statements of about, perhaps 50 or 60 of our companies every month. But in the case of Marmon, for example, Marmon itself owns over 100 companies. And it was the creature of, it was created by Jay Pritzker and his brother Bob. And it was a remarkable company when we bought it, but it was highly diversified already, and then we've diversified it further. So it is something of a Berkshire within Berkshire. And we found that that's working very good as an arrangement. It was interesting. Jay Pritzker was a remarkable manager, and there's various branches of the Pritzker family, so it really goes back to A.N. Pritzker before Jay and so on. But in 1954, they changed the federal tax code very dramatically in the United States. It was quite a blow to me because I'd been at Columbia and I'd been reading a J.K. Lasser book about the tax code, and then they went and changed the whole damn thing. So, but 54 was a big change. Those years come every now and then, like 1986, and you may see a big one of these days. And there was a company called Rockwood Chocolates in Brooklyn, and they made Rockwood chocolate bits, which we used to sell at the Buffett grocery store, and people made chocolate chip cookies out of them and everything. And then it turned out that cocoa, which lately has had a big run too, cocoa was 5 cents a pound in 1941 when LIFO was first allowed for insurance for tax purposes. And the Rockwood Chocolate Company went into on the LIFO message, so they owned like 30 million pounds or thereabouts of cocoa. And then cocoa took a run in 1955, and I just moved to New York. And there was a provision in the new tax code that if you were in 2 or more companies, and and you did certain things, and you've been in them for 5 years, and you got out of one of them that there would be no capital gains tax on LIFO inventory gains. And the tax rates were around 48%, maybe 52%. And so there was this huge profit because the cocoa had gone up in price, but that made it terrible for them in selling Rockwood chocolate bits because the price at retail of the chocolate bits did not match what was going on at wholesale. Something almost identical has been happening in the chocolate business. Recently, Hershey Chocolate just came out and said they're going to have a bad quarter, and we're paying $4.50 a pound for chocolate from cocoa because things are going on in West Africa that make cocoa prices go up dramatically. In any event, Jay Pritzker bought control of Rockwood, the chocolate company. And like I say, I was 24 or 5 years old, and they called a meeting to split off one of the chocolate businesses in a way that would enable them to recognize the gain on these cocoa beans without paying roughly 50% federal taxes on the gain. So I went to the meeting, which was in Brooklyn, and nobody was there. This is in the turn every page category, except one guy. And I was 24 and he was 29, and it was Jay Pritzker. And nobody had showed up at the meeting, and it was kind of a crummy building they had, but they had a lot of cocoa there. And Jay just gave me a lecture, or a lesson really, I should say, on the tax code. And I mean, I could have gone to graduate school for years and never learned as much as he did. And then later, we actually bought the company, that Rockwood company, after he did some other things, became the basis for Marmon. And Marmon, among other things, developed the car that won the first Indianapolis Speedway race. And it invented the rear view mirror, which I'm not sure is a great advantage in economics or anything, but the guy that they used to have on the Indianapolis 500, they had two people in the car. One guy was to look back and see what the other people were doing, and the other guy was to drive the car. And our guy got sick, and so they invented a rear view mirror. So if you want to look at the kind of, what's going on in the laboratories of Berkshire Hathaway, and we've got people working on things like the rear view mirror.
Hey, Warren?
Yeah.
I'm happy a friend did call. So that still works. Peter Eastwood, who runs one of our Berkshire subsidiaries and does a great job of running it, tracked down that Portello's is owned by a private equity firm called Berkshire Partners. So that was the basis of the question, but it's not associated with Berkshire. So we got to the bottom of that one. Yeah. Thank you, Peter.
That's just a sample of the way we operate around Berkshire.
下一个提问者提到几年前，公司旗下的盖克保险在远程信息技术，一种通过车辆数据来评估驾驶风险的技术应用方面落后于竞争对手，现在已经展现出明显的转机。因此，他想了解在托德，他以前是巴菲特的投资经理之一，后来负责盖克业务的领导下，采取了哪些具体措施来实现这种转变，以及如何在未来保持竞争优势。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
Yeah, Todd has done a great job for us in terms of turning around the operations. When he took over, there were two major issues that Geico was behind its competitors on. Firstly, the term Warren used and we all have been using is matching rate to risk. And secondly, telematics. We were at the bottom of the list insofar as telematics are concerned about 5-6 years ago. Since then, we have made rapid strides, and telematics, which used to be a source of competitive disadvantage to us, is no longer so. And I would argue that our telematics at Geico is about as good as anyone else's today. So that's been one huge catch-up. Secondly, in terms of matching rate to risk, there again, I think we have caught up with our competitors, and we're as good as anyone else in the field. All this, together with the cost reduction effort that Geico and Todd gets a lot of credit for, he has basically reduced the workforce by 20,000, starting with something close to 50,000. He's brought it down to 20,000, and that translates to, I guess, at least $2 billion per year. So all this has allowed Geico to become a much focused competitor. So much so, in the last 7 quarters, Geico has shown a combined ratio that has an 8 in front of it. And I never thought I'd live to see the day when anyone could have a combined ratio as so low as it is right now. So I think Geico's done a great job. Its 80 combined translates to the largest profit anyone is making on the underwriting side in the personal automobile business. So, we've achieved a lot, Todd has achieved a lot, but I do not want to be so arrogant as to say that mission accomplished. We've achieved a lot, but I still think we need to do a lot more in technology. AI, as we talked about, is going to be a big force, and we need to play catch-up there. Not catch-up, but we ought to be in a state of readiness. So I think Geico is in a great shape right now. Warren, you want to add anything?
No, it's a fascinating case study, and that's what's so interesting about the whole game of business, but particularly about our businesses, is that each one is a little different, but they all have challenges of certain sorts, but they also, certain numbers have opportunities. We paid $50 million for half of Geico in 1976. What turned out to be half of Geico? $50 million. 50%. Now 100%, but 50% of $2 billion that we earned in the first quarter is $1 billion, which on a $50 million investment is 20 for 1 1/4. So that takes years to develop. But the interesting thing is, the auto insurance policy, which didn't even exist 100 years ago. I mean, you didn't. It just, well, I should say 120 years ago. But it's by far the largest item in the property casualty insurance business. It's huge.
The only thing I'd like to add is, in addition to the underwriting profit, Geico provides $29 billion of float.
Oh yeah, in addition, yeah. And that's not unimportant. When you paid $50 million to get the business, it's giving you $29 billion to work with for nothing. And on top of that, gives you $1 billion of profit in a quarter. The interesting thing about auto insurance is that the company was started in 1936. We're selling the same product as 1936. We're being more sophisticated about pricing it than we were then. Somebody just made the judgment, the fellow that came from USAA, made the judgment that government employees, the name Geico stands for Government Employees Insurance Company, that government employees were better drivers than average. And I don't think he was an actuary or anything else, but he just made an observation. And so he left USAA, which is still a very successful company, and he started Geico for a few $100,000. And he made money the first year from underwriting. He made money the second year. This was not a public offering type thing. You just phony accounting for 10 years and all that sort of thing. They just priced it to make money. And that's exactly what's been done since 1936. The policy really, your auto insurance policy looks a lot like the one that you had then. And this huge field has sprung up around us, and it's still growing. And of course, nobody likes to buy insurance, but they sure like to drive. and Geico is it's a fascinating story. And about 3 times over the years, the company has gotten sidetracked one way or another. And then it gets back to its basics, and it's a wonderful, wonderful business. And we showed at this annual meeting one time a message from Lorimer Davidson. And Lorimer Davidson in January of 1950 was the only person in the building that I'd gone down on a Saturday to visit, but it turned out they didn't work on Saturdays in Washington, and I pounded on the door until finally a janitor let me in. And I said to the janitor, "Is there anybody else I can talk to here except you?" And he didn't take it personally, and he said, "Oh, there's one guy on the 6th floor." And a fellow named Lorimer Davidson did wonderful things for me. You get a few breaks in life in terms of people you will meet who can just change your life dramatically. And if you need a handful of those. And when you get them, you treasure them. And we've had them on this board at Berkshire. If you take Tom Murphy and Sandy Gottesman and Walter Scott and Bill Scott, one thing we've done is we've held on to human assets. We've made lifelong assets out of people that are the right sort, and with incredible talent, but also just lots of fun to work with and always doing more than their share. And to get a chance to talk to Lorimer Davidson on a Saturday afternoon, you just listen carefully. And that comes in the category of turn every page. Some of them you want to turn pretty fast, but you just get lucky in life, and you want to take advantage of your luck.
下面的提问者首先赞扬了巴菲特，然后希望巴菲特具体说明格雷格身上有哪些特质使他成为巴菲特首选的接班人。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的：要注意的是，这个问题巴菲特可能没有听清，所以有些答非所问。
Well, you've hit on the most important question. And in terms of the business, we've got a wonderful group of businesses. We've got an ability to do things that nobody else can do, which is hard to get in a capitalistic system that's been developed as fully as the United States has been. I mean, imagine being able to create something that, in a very, very, very big playing field, it'd really be very, very hard to develop anything like it. I don't think you could develop the people around it, let alone the capital position, and the history and everything else. And the answer, of course, is that it does take a long, long time, and it takes getting around you a small cadre of people, which then spreads out somewhat, but where you've got mutual trust, where people do more than their share. And I've been around a lot of businesses over the years. And by nature, I'm somewhat critical of everything. I mean, I'm looking for what's wrong in things, because that's part of investing is looking, what are you missing? But we have, we've got people that, if they're asked to put on a show like this, instead of doing whatever their regular job is, they participated. I went around the groups of people who were exhibiting yesterday for an hour and a half. And these are people who are thanking me, and totally enthused about coming and doing a lot of work for which they don't get paid anything extra. And I don't know anything about the arrangements the individual companies make, but they work hard and they enjoy their work. And, you really want to work at something you enjoy. I've had 5 bosses in life, and I liked every one of them. And they were all interesting. I still decided that I'd rather work for myself than anybody else. But if you find people that are wonderful to work with, that's the place to go. And I've told my kids that, basically, that you don't get lucky like I did when I found at 7 or 8 years of age what really interested me. It could have taken a lot longer, but you want to find the song. Find the sound. There's a movie called The Glenn Miller Story, and Glenn Miller went on from having a broken down band for 15 years to turning out the first. He found the sound and created the first gold record. I don't know whether any of you know what it was, but it was the Chattanooga Choo Choo in 1941, I think it was. And he turned around from being a nothing with a band that he had till he found the sound. And I always have told my kids ever since that their sound isn't my sound, but and you don't find it necessarily on the first job you take, because you got to eat, but if you get lucky like I did, you find it when you're very young, and then just keep doing it, and don't worry too much about starting salaries, and don't worry about be very careful who you work for, because you will take on the habits of the people around you. So there's certain jobs you shouldn't take, but you've got the greatest country in the world, and you've got the greatest time in the world. So I would say that while I'm handing this over to Greg, that you can't even dream all the dreams that you could have about a place like Berkshire. But the big thing you have to do, though, is always to be sure you can play the next day. I mean, in terms of financial activities on a meaningful scale, you don't want to go. There was a book about, what was the name of that book? You only have to get rich once. I mean, you don't want to do anything that risks what's been created. So if very stupid things are happening around you, you do know how to participate. If people are making more money because they're borrowing money, or they're participating in securities that are really pieces of junk, but they hope to find a bigger sucker later on, you just have to forget that. That'll bite you at some point. And the basic game is so good, and you've been so lucky to be born now. I mean, if I'd been born in 1700, I'd say, I want to go back in the womb. What the hell with this? I mean, it's just too hard. But now I've come along to do something where I can just play around all day with things I enjoy doing, and it's really it's a pretty wonderful life. Anything, Greg, you want to add or subtract from that?
Nothing to subtract, but I would always just say I couldn't be more, as I've said in the past, more humbled and honored, obviously, to be in this role. But to have actually been part of Berkshire for, Warren, it's now 25 plus years, had the opportunity to be part of Berkshire and to work with you and Ajit and our board, but many other people in our company. And as you touched on, when you find something like that, and you find something like that, like Berkshire, that's so special, you fall in love with it, and it becomes just what you want to do every day, and it's just an incredible opportunity. So thank you.
And to the gentleman who asked the question, if you don't find it immediately, don't starve to death or anything in the meantime. But you will find it, and you'll find it in the right individual. In a sense, it's somewhat like finding the right person in marriage. I mean, probably the first. Some of you may have married the person you met on your first date, although I guess they don't even have dates anymore. But sometimes it pays to wait too.
下一个问题是，现在的私募股权公司如黑石、阿波罗积极进入保险业，并试图复制伯克希尔管理浮存金模式的问题。他想知道巴菲特如何看待这种竞争对伯克希尔保险业务和承保纪律的影响，是否认为私募股权模式对保单持有人和整个金融系统构成风险， 以及这种竞争是否增加了伯克希尔寻找并安全盈利的定价保险机会的难度。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
Yeah, part of the question is very easy. There's no question the private equity firms have come into the space, and we are no longer competitive in this space. We used to do a fair amount in this space, but in the last 3-4 years, I don't think we've done a single deal. Now, you ought to separate this whole segment in two separate segments. One is the property casualty end of the business and the life end of the business. The private equity firms that you mentioned are all very active in the life end of the business, not the property casualty end of the business. You are right in identifying the risks in these private equity firms are taking on, both in terms of leverage and in terms of credit risk. And while the economy is doing great and credit spreads are low, the private equity firms who've taken the assets from very conservative investments, and I wouldn't say high octane, but they've certainly invested these assets in situations where they get a lot more return on the investment. And as I said, as long as the economy is good and credit spreads are low, they will make money, they'll make a lot of money because of leverage. However, there is always the danger that at some point the regulators might get cranky and say, you're taking too much risk on behalf of your policyholders. And that could end in tears. We do not like the risk reward that these situations offer. And therefore, we put up the white flag and said, we can't compete in this segment right now.
Yeah, I think there are people that want to copy Berkshire's model, but usually they don't want to copy it by also copying the model of the CEO having all of his money in the company forever. And I mean, they've got a different equation. They're interested in, and that's capitalism, but they have a whole different situation, and they probably have a somewhat different fiduciary feeling about what they're doing. And sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, they go on to other things. And if what we do here at Berkshire doesn't work, I spend the end of my life regretting what I've created. So it's just a whole different personal equation. And there is no property casualty company that can basically replicate Berkshire. That wasn't the case at the start. I mean, at the start, we just had National Indemnity a few miles from here, and anybody could have duplicated what we had. But that was before a G. and the G came with us in 1986, and at that point, the other fellow should have given up.
下一个问题是问关于自动驾驶汽车对盖可汽车保险业务影响的问题。自动驾驶汽车的出现可能会颠覆传统的汽车保险模式，因为目前保险业务是围绕人类驾驶员的风险来设计的。他猜测未来的汽车保险可能会转变为自动驾驶车辆制造商和软件公司的产品责任险。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
Yeah, there's no question that insurance for automobiles is going to change dramatically once self-driving cars become a reality. The big change that we will see is what you identified. Most of the insurance that is sold and bought revolves around operator errors and how often they happen, how severe they are, and therefore what premium we ought to charge. To the extent these new self-driving cars are more safe and are involved in fewer accidents, that insurance will be less required. Instead, it'll be substituted by, as you mentioned, product liability. So we at Geico and elsewhere are certainly trying to get ready for that switch, where we move from providing insurance for operator errors and be more ready to provide protection for product errors and omissions in the construction of these automobiles.
Yeah, we expect change in all our businesses, and good thing we didn't. Charlie pushed me into it, but if I'd settled for being in New England textiles, and even though it worked well for 70 years or so prior there too, the world changes, and if the game didn't change at all, it really would be very interesting. It's if every time you swung at a baseball, you hit a home run, the game wouldn't be interesting. If every time you hit a golf ball, you had a hole in one, it wouldn't be interesting. So the fact that there will be things you have to think about all the time as you go along, and you'll make mistakes and all that. That's really part of the fun. I mean, your brain would turn to mush if you didn't have a few problems now and then. So, auto insurance will change, although it's remarkable how little it has changed. But it's only been around since, for a relatively small time, and who knows what we're doing to move in transportation 100 years from now. If you go back a couple hundred years ago, who could have predicted the United States would look like what it does, and people would move like they do, and people would enjoy themselves like they do? I mean, it's just, it's a dynamic world, and the biggest thing we have to worry about, unfortunately, is that we've learned how to destroy the world too, and recent years. And so we've got this wonderful world, which now we know that there are 8 countries that, and probably a 9th coming on, that can destroy, and we don't have what I would consider necessarily the perfect people leading each one of the 9, or some of the 9 countries. And when Einstein came up with E equals MC squared back in 1905, he didn't dream of the fact, that energy could really be converted, or mass could be converted into energy in a way that would change the world. When I was born in 1930, they had known about the law of physics that Einstein had come up with 25 years earlier. Nobody, to my knowledge, had thought, what can this do to change warfare in the future? And literally, it just wasn't thought. Einstein didn't think about it at that point. And then in 1939, Roosevelt got a letter around a month before Germany moved into Poland. They got it around August 1st. It's the most famous letter in history from Leo Szilard. Leo Szilard couldn't get his letter in front of Roosevelt because whoever heard of Leo Szilard, but he got Einstein to sign it. And Roosevelt probably understood about as much about physics as I do, so he didn't understand it, but he understood that Einstein signed it. So he calls in General Grover, may not have been general then, and said, we should do something about this. And all we did was learn how to destroy the world, and we needed to do it. And Germany had Heisenberg, and he looked like he was ahead of us. And we can't put that genie back in the bottle. And the world does change, and we've got all these we've got wonderful things, but we also have, we have a guy in North Korea. If we criticize his haircut, even, who knows what he might decide to do with. What does North Korea need nuclear weapons for? I mean, can that be a good thing in the world? But they're not going to go away. So it's a world of change, and we are enjoying incredible change that's contributed to everybody in this room living so much better than people were living a couple hundred years ago. But we haven't been able to avoid. We haven't changed human beings very much so far. We've certainly changed weapons of mass destruction, but we haven't made much progress with the human race, and we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, we'll see changes in auto insurance too, and cars, and that will be more. It'd be easier for us to deal with it than it was when we had to deal with the problems of turning out textiles in New England. And you deal with the world as it develops. And like I say, everybody here is living in the luckiest period, but enjoy your luck, and you still try to figure out the answers to what's going to happen in auto insurance as we go along, and we've done pretty well actually adapting to.
I'd just like to add, we talked about the shift to product liability and to protection for accidents that take place because of an error in terms of how the product was designed or supplied. The only thing I want to add is, in addition to that shift, I think what we'll see is a major shift where the number of accidents that take place and need to be provided for will drop dramatically because of automatic driving. But on the other hand, the cost per repair, every time there's an accident, the cost of repairing and bringing everything back to where it used to be would go up very significantly because of the amount of technology that's going into the car. How those two variables interact with each other in terms of the total cost of providing the insurance, I think is still an open issue.
I'll give you 2 interesting figures to ponder. When I walked into Geico's offices in 1950, the average price of a policy was around $40 a year. It varies all over the lot depending on location and everything, but it's pretty easy to get up to $2,000, and depending on how urban your areas are, and everything can get considerably higher. During that same time, the number of people killed in auto accidents have fallen from roughly 6 per 100 million miles driven to a little over 1. So the cars become incredibly safer, and it costs 50 times as much down, or thereabouts, to buy insurance policies. So when people talk about the developments in car driving and all that sort of thing, it's a lot easier sometimes. The Buck Rogers aspect of it, people look at it, but they don't actually think of what really happens to the math of the business. The auto insurance industry has been a huge growth industry. And for that matter, homeowners insurance prices in Nebraska have doubled in the last 10 years, adjusted for general inflation. And convective storms, have just gone on a tear, and it's still unprofitable to write homeowners insurance in Nebraska after doubling the price in the last 10 years. So it's very hard to predict what these big changes mean, and you just have to keep thinking all the time. But you don't want to read some research report that says the world's coming to an end or the world's going to be wonderful because of this or that, because there's about 50 other developments going on at the same time that you need to think about, and that you need to keep observing as you go along. You never reach an answer in this business. You reach a point of action that you take, but we try to get into as high probability things as we think we can do and play the game in the same way. But it will be different than you think, and you should wake up every morning and think about that too. If you're in the business of managing businesses.
有观众提出了一个关于格雷格未来作为伯克希尔执行长如何进行资本配置的问题。格雷格在未来10年内将面临比伯克希尔历史上任何时期都更庞大的资本配置的任务，因此希望了解他对资本配置的看法。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
Sure. So this bar is not too high. No, it's but very fortunate when you think of Berkshire again, and we've talked about this where we start from, and I'll clearly touch on the investment and the related investment allocation. But we start from a great place where we've got a great culture within the business. We have values that we, as a management team, and really as defined by Warren and those Charlie and everybody associated with the business, we've got great values that really set Berkshire up well for the future. And obviously, as we deploy capital and allocate capital, it's critical to Berkshire as we go forward. And equally, it's around managing risk. But when I think of our values, there are a couple that are absolutely critical. One, we'll maintain the reputation of Berkshire and that of our company. And I view that in investing or how we operate things across each of our businesses. That will always be a priority and something that we'll ensure is in the forefront of our minds. I think equally, as we then look at our back to Warren's balance sheet comment, we will have a fortress of a balance sheet. And we want to, I thought, Sue Decker, our lead director, said it well yesterday. We've got a significant set of cash right now, but it's an enormous asset to have that, and that will continue to be a philosophy. Yes, when we can deploy it, we'll deploy it well, and I'll come to that. But equally, we do recognize it as a strategic asset, and it allows us to weather the difficult times and at the same and not be dependent on anybody. So again, that will be an investment philosophy. We will remain Berkshire, and we will never be dependent on a bank or some other party for Berkshire to be successful. Thank you. I would then move to touch on allocation of capital will be absolutely critical, but with that comes management of risk and understanding risk. And that falls upon all our managers, insurance, non-insurance, but we'll bring that across Berkshire. And then the other value I would touch on, but that really relates to where I'm going, is ultimately we have a great set of operating companies that do produce significant cash flows, be it in the insurance companies creating float or our various non-insurance companies producing significant cash flows on an annual basis. We intend to continue to ensure that's a strength of Berkshire as we go forward. And it's absolutely critical to our long-term success. Now, with those cash flows and with the float, and then equally as touched on, we have significant resources already on our balance sheet. We'll really continue to move forward with a very similar philosophy, or it's an identical philosophy to what we've had currently and for the past 60 years. We'll start by looking at those opportunities within our business, and by that I mean within our insurance, non-insurance businesses. Are they properly capitalized and have the opportunity to manage their business? And that will continue to exist. They'll operate in an autonomous way, but in the end, Berkshire still manages the capital that will go into those businesses, or what potentially will come out of those businesses. Equally, the next opportunity is to acquire businesses in their totality, or 100%. And there are great times when we can do that. Warren touched on, we had one that was interesting in the last quarter, the $10 billion acquisition. But again, the value relative to the risk have to be right. And if it's right, we want to own it. If it's not the time, there'll be another time to own assets like that. And then there's the opportunity to own pieces of companies through the equity. But as Warren's always highlighted, and again, this will be our approach to how we think around those companies, we own a piece of a company. We own a piece of that cash flow. We own a piece of their balance sheet. It's not just a share certificate. And as we approach that, and really we'll approach it with the thought that we're going to own this company for the long term, It's, again, understanding what, be it the 100% company or the 1% company, do we thoroughly understand and thoroughly do we have a strong view of what those economic prospects of those companies will look like? And Warren said it earlier, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. If we don't have a view of that, we won't be investing, be it 100% or 2% of a company through equities. We have to thoroughly understand what those prospects look like, and associated with understanding those prospects, we need to understand the underlying risk of the businesses. And it's really the investment philosophy and how Warren and the team have allocated capital for the past 60 years. Really, it will not change, and it's the approach we'll take as we go forward. Warren?
Yeah, I don't want to go on too long on this, but
sorry, I covered it.
No, but this is important because it's very obvious that the country, for example, needs incredible improvement, rethinking, redirection, even to some extent, in the grid. I mean, we've outgrown what would be the model that America should have, and in a sense, it's a problem something akin to the interstate highway system, where you needed the power of the government really to get things done, because it doesn't work so well when you get 48 or 50 jurisdictions that each has their own way of thinking about things. And of course, in World War II, we called in people at $1 an hour, and we knew we had to turn out ships like crazy, and we knew that we had to convert Ford Motor from being a car manufacturer into an aircraft manufacturer in a matter of days, not weeks, not months. So you need there are certain really major investment situations where we have capital like nobody else has in the private system. We have particular know-how in the whole generation and transmission arena. The country's going to need it, but we have to figure out a way that makes sense from the standpoint of the government, from the standpoint of the public, and from the standpoint of Berkshire, and we haven't figured that out yet. I don't know whether Greg wants to even explain a few of the major problems, but that is a clear and present use of hundreds of billions of dollars. And you have people that set up funds and say they're getting paid for just assembling stuff, but that's not the way to handle it. The way to handle it is to have some kind of a government private industry cooperation similar to what you do in a war. And I don't think when they were doing the highway system, I don't think that the government set up its own guys that were going to pour all the cement or anything like that. But you needed a cooperation, and we're at that point, I think, in terms of energy. But I don't think we made any progress particularly. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, and I think these are very unique in that, not unique in that it's sort of reflective of where we're at. There will be very significant investment opportunities across a variety of industries, as Warren touched on in the electric industry or the energy space. We obviously know that well with our existing business, and the capital required to meet the long-term needs of what's currently projected as demand is enormous, and we as Berkshire will be in a good position to help address those needs. But the model around it and the risks that need to be addressed to deploy that type of capital will be different than they are today. Warren's point.
Yeah, the muscle of the federal government will be needed, but the test of whether you can have 48 or 50, depending on the nature of things, jurisdictions that are cooperating to do something that has opposition, will have opposition in every single state. If they'd taken a vote during World War II, or if they'd taken a vote on the interstate highway system, it would have been slowed down to an incredible degree. So the question is how to use these strengths that this country has to actually turn it in to what it should be capable of, while still preserving, a republic with 48 and connected and a couple of unconnected states. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. But we do have capital, and we actually have some knowledge that very few places have. I mean, we know what the game's about, but putting together that energy with knowledge and with capital and everything it's just not easy. And it should be something that we're capable of in the country, but the country was not designed for having, in a certain way, it was not designed for having 48 different jurisdictions that could mess up anything that you were attempting to do. And during wartime, it's one thing to get agreement, but during peacetime, it's something. It's a different problem. That's going to be one for the next generation. But it's important.
下面的问题是关于伯克希尔西部电力公司因野火而面临巨额责任的问题。 提问者希望了解伯克希尔如何制定策略来保护公司备受未来类似野火责任的影响。对于这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
Well, that's a very good question, and we made some mistakes in the past when we bought Pacific Corp in 2005.
Yes.
Laura Scott and David Sokol and myself, three guys who capitalists at heart, and we're dealing with our own money, but we made a mistake by not carving it up into the 7 states that we were buying, and it came with an aggregation where it wasn't state by state, and we kept the same structure, and that was a big mistake. There are, well, every part of the country is going to need electricity, and there are going to be places where public electric or privately held electric utilities would be very foolish to operate. And how that gets resolved in a democracy, we will find out. But those are the facts as they stand now, I would say. Greg?
Yeah. The reality, the risk around the wildfires, i.e. do the wildfires occur, they're not going away.
No.
And we know that, and the risk probably goes up each year. So, but what we can do to reduce the risk of it impacting our system and our underlying assets and unfortunately the liabilities that come with such events, we can change that and manage that. We can't eliminate the risk, but we can reduce it. And that's where we've got our teams in the West, but we really are approaching it across all our energy infrastructure, because the reality is the wildfires have now occurred in Texas. They've had a variety of them throughout the U.S., and we're all very focused on how we manage that risk. How we manage it is we start by addressing the actual assets, how we're maintaining them, and where we invest into them. So we try to make sure that they're either not causing the fire or potentially even hardening the system as to what can they withstand. So it's very much, we start with the operational focus. We then take it even further, and this is something Warren and I've discussed many times, is that the utilities started to recognize when we have these unusual weather events, and Warren touched on what's been happening in Nebraska with storms, but they're equally occurring or significant events occurring out west. But when we have those, we've gotten very, very good at saying, okay, we have to manage the system differently. We'll potentially de-energize because there's likely to be an event. But the one thing we hadn't tackled, and this is very relevant to the one significant event we had back in 2020 in Pacific Corp, is we didn't de-energize the system as the fire was approaching. Because our employees and the whole management team have been all their lives trained to keep the lights on. And the last thing they want to do is turn those lights off and have a system de-energized. And after those events, and as we really looked at how we're going to move forward in managing the assets and reducing that risk, we have clearly recognized as a team that we have to de-energize those assets. So now as we get fires encroaching at a certain number of miles, we de-energize, because we do not want to contribute to the fire, nor obviously harm any of our consumers or contribute, unfortunately, if there's a death. And that's really where we had to take our team, that we're managing a different risk now. It's not around keeping the lights on. It's around protecting the general public and ensuring the fire does not spread further. So we've gone as far as that, and I'll stand corrected on this one, but we're probably the one utility or across our utilities that does that today. And we strongly believe that. Becky?
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
Doesn't that open you up to other risk? If you shut down your system, a hospital gets shut down, somebody dies?
Fortunately, that's something that we do deal with a lot, because we have power outages that occur by accident. So when we look at critical infrastructure, because it's an excellent point, and we're constantly reevaluating it, and we do receive a lot of feedback from our customer groups as to how do we manage that. But that is something we deal with on a more routine basis than we'd ever like. The lights go out, we have to make sure the hospitals stay on, emergency units can respond and all that. But there is risk there. So then we spend a lot more time educating the consumers and our consumer groups, our customers. Okay, this is what will happen. We need to understand your unusual situations, and how can we best tackle that, again, so we just don't take on another liability. So there's a lot around de-energization. And then just to take it to the last step, and Warren's touched on that, just in general on energy policy, we have to work with our states and our regulators to ensure this was never a risk we took on or envisioned when we were investing in utilities, nor would any of the investors who've invested in other energy companies. You earn a very set return for taking on a very set defined risks associated with that asset. And this has gone well beyond that. We don't earn the type of returns, nor can you earn a large enough return to take on these risks. So it's not just about solving the return side. We really have to solve the risk side, which means we work with our regulators. We're working with our state legislators to get to the right answer. And that's really just, that'll be an ongoing process. There are not silver bullets out there, but every day our teams across utilities are working hard to reduce that risk, recognizing the fundamental risk of the wildfires is not going away.
But there's some problems that can't be solved, and we shouldn't be in the business of taking your money, investors' money, and tackling things that we don't know the solution for. And you can present the arguments, but it's a political decision when you are dealing with states or the federal government. And if you're in something where you're going to lose, the big thing to do is quit. And you present your case as well as you can and everything else, but if you don't hold the pen in the end, we don't have any business taking your money and doing dumb things with us. And we can do our best to explain what the intelligent things are, but it's your money. And so it's very hard to tell how to handle the questions of politically determined decisions that are going to go to court in many cases, but you know that it just doesn't make sense. We know what we think a sensible system would be, and we ought to explain what we think it is, and do the best to get our position, because it's pro-social to have the right solution to have it. But the right solution, for example, in the interstate, wasn't to let 48 states each decide on their own way of doing it and award contractors the jobs based. There's some problems that can't be solved, and we are not in the business of trying to solve insolvable problems.
Yeah. I'd even go, for example...
But then the problem you have, of course, is that the people that work for you, it's their job, so they want to have reasons to keep going. And those are tough choices if you're managing, but that's why they have managers.
And one I was just going to add, because you touched on something really important there, that effectively, for example, with the utilities and the wildfires, we can't just become the insurer of last resort, and that we're going to cover any cost and all costs, irrespective of what occurred. And that's a little bit of the situation we're in right now with our largest challenge, a 2020 wildfire, where there were four fires occurring at a challenging time. One, we've always asserted, was a lightning strike that was not inside our service territory. The fire burnt into our service territory, and we became responsible for that fire, effectively, through the courts. And we've continued to hold firm that we're not responsible for that. Rightfully, I mean, we didn't contribute to it, and we didn't initiate it, nor did we feel we ever contributed to it. But it's getting, again, if you look at the risks that's there, we have to manage through things like that. We'll get through that litigation. We're happy to report, for example, on that one, after 5 years, the Oregon Forestry Department has come out and said the other fires we did have that we were able to manage and extinguish did not contribute to that fire. And that fourth fire is the largest fire of the four. It's 60% of the claims. We're 5 years into effectively getting that information into the courts. Now, that will outline our legal strategy, obviously, going forward, but it's things we're dealing with. But we continue to learn from this as a utility industry. So we're in very much each of the legislatures, as I said, making sure we get clear definition where liability falls, what can the economic damages be, but most importantly, what can the non-economic damages be? And again, with the thought, we can't be the insurer of last resort. We just can't be responsible for everything that happens in a state. Yeah. If we want to do it with our own money, we can do it, but we're not going to do things with your money that we think are stupid. I mean, you ought to get rid of us if we do it. And it's easier to do stupid things with other people's money than it is with your own money. That's one of the problems government has, just generally. We don't want to bring it to private enterprise. But it is important that the United States have an intelligent energy policy, just as it was important during World War II that we learned how to make ships instead of cars extremely fast. And we figured out the answer. We combined private enterprise with the power of government. And but how feasible that is in a democracy, and it was clearly obvious during World War what needed to be done, and we did it. But it's not so clear when you get 330 million people all arguing their own self-interest, and of course deciding what will happen, and having the people often who are making the decisions reacting as they did 20 years earlier, when they don't really bear the responsibility for the decision. Right? Anyway, that's management, and we'll do our best.
下一个是关于伯克希尔能源公司估值显著下降的问题。提问者指出，伯克希尔分2次完成收购，但是估值在2年内下降超过 40%。提问者认为，这不仅仅是太平洋电力公司负债的问题，希望巴菲特解释导致估值大幅下降的具体原因。对这个问题，管理层是这么回答的。
We don't know how much we'll lose out of Pacific Corp and decisions that are made, but we also know that certain of the attitudes demonstrated by that particular example have got analogs throughout the utility system, and there's a lot of states that so far have been very good, decent to operate in. And there are some now that are rat poison, as Charlie would say, to operate in. And that knowledge was accentuated when we saw what happened in the Pacific Northwest. And it's accentuated by what we've seen as to how utilities have been treated in certain other situations. And then on top of that, so that it wasn't just a direct question of what was involved at Pacific Corp, it was an extrapolation of a societal trend. And secondly, we also had a decision. We didn't expect that at all, the real estate business, and those kind of things can change values, and courts can change values. And it's a lot easier to make those decisions when you just own marketable securities than when you own businesses. And I've made plenty of those decisions as I've watched what have happened in various industries and companies in over 70 years. But Greg made the decision, which was fine with us, to get out. Well, and he had no knowledge of what was going to be happening in either the real estate field or the utility field. And we're not in the mood to sell any business of it. But Berkshire Hathaway Energy is worth considerably less money than it was 2 years ago based on societal factors. And that happens in some of our businesses. It certainly happened in our textile business, and it's happened. The public utility business is not as good a business as it was a couple of years ago. And if anybody doesn't believe that, they can look at Hawaiian Electric, and they can look at Edison in the current wildfires situation in California, and there's societal trends. But that's the explanation. That values change, and they don't always change upward. And when we made the deal with Greg, we were happy to buy out the Scott family at that price. And when we made the deal with the Scott company, we wouldn't have been happy to pay Greg the price that he received. But that's like Berkshire shares. We bought in stock at X, and we buy in stock at less than X if conditions change poor. And we pay, over the years, we pay more and more because it builds in value, but it doesn't do it in a straight line. And I would say that our enthusiasm for buying public utility companies is different now than it would have been a couple years ago. That happens in other industries too. It's pretty dramatic in public utilities, and it's particularly dramatic in public utilities because they are going to need lots of money. So if you're going to need lots of money, you probably ought to behave in a way that encourages people to give you lots of money, and we will see where we go. We'd like to see public utilities do well, but our responsibility is to the shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway.
下一个问题是，巴菲特如何评估伯克希尔最近一个财年的盈利能力，以及有哪些重要因素导致其盈利能力与报告的净收入之间存在差异增加或减少？盈利能力通常指的是公司持续创造利润的内在能力，可能与受短期市场波动影响的净收入有所不同。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的。
I think our underlying earning power was affected negatively here a while back by what happened in the utility field. I think that our earning power was not enlarged by any large acquisitions that come along, but they come along periodically. So we will see something at some point that well, on the one that was $10 billion, we would have added to earning power. I mean, why else would we do it? So that's very situational. And of course, it depends so much on what the general market is doing and what interest rates are doing and what psychology is doing. We will make our best deals when people are the most pessimistic. That's been true ever since I was 1930. I was born in 1930. When I was born, things got much more attractive over the next 2 years, and apparently I didn't do anything about it there. But that was the opportunity of a lifetime, and I blew it by worrying about the kid in the next crib or something. But over my lifetime, I've had fabulous opportunities sometimes, and they happen because humans are human. And I'm fearful of all kinds of things. I don't want to try and, be one of the Walendas and walk on a tiny strip between a couple of twin towers or something, or whatever it may be. But I don't get fearful by things that other people are afraid of in a financial way. That the idea that if let's say Berkshire went down 50% next week, I would regard that as a fantastic opportunity, and it wouldn't bother me in the least. And most people aren't. They just react differently. And so it's not that I don't have emotions, but I don't have emotions about the prices of stocks. I mean, those decisions get all the way to my brain, whereas emotions can get bogged down some other place. So Berkshire will increase its earning power over time as we retain money. I mean, we are doing things making decisions every day. People are working, we're retaining earnings. We will build the earning power, but it won't be coming in any even stream, and it certainly won't be matched dollar for dollar on either the upside or the downside. And market prices them. But that's what makes it a good business. The investment business is that everything isn't properly appraised, and the sillier other people get, the better your opportunities get.
有观众想了解，对比巴菲特对子公司放任自流的管理方式，希望格雷格描述自己的管理方法。
Well, we've got our managers over there, and I would say going back to 2018, it's been very fortunate to be in this role because, one, I had to learn a lot of the businesses, and there's no question, as Warren bought the businesses, had that general knowledge. I absolutely had to engage with each of them, and they've been great in sharing their business models, their approach, their thoughts around where the risks and opportunities are. And I think as we went through that, there's no question, I had questions and wanted to engage with them. And Warren talks about the curiosity being important as you go through things. That would be my style, to have questions and comments around their business, their frameworks. At the same time, they have great businesses and they run them very autonomously, and that remains in place. But if there's opportunities to see where maybe you've seen something in another business or an opportunity I may see in their industry, we're going to discuss it and see if that's something we should pursue, or are we properly addressing the risk. And I found all our managers to be absolutely engaging on that. And want to have those dialogues. And I'd say that's a reflection of my approach. I'd also say that when you think of our managers, again, very autonomous. They run their businesses. They know it better than I ever will. But if I see an opportunity that it's well worth their time to talk to another one of our managers, if it's Geico and they've gone through a technology transformation, they're not by themselves that need to be thinking that way. We want to make sure the right folks are talking and figuring out how we can benefit from the prior experiences. So it's, I would say, more active, but hopefully in a very positive way, and we got an exceptional group, so it's worked out exceptionally well as I've gone through that period of time.
It's working way better with Greg than with me because, I just I didn't want to work as hard as he works, and I could get away with it because we've got a basically good business, very good business, and I wasn't in danger of you firing me by virtue of ownership and the fact that we would do pretty well. But the fact that you can do pretty well doesn't mean you couldn't do better, and Greg can do better at many things. Many people want to be managed, need help in being managed. Some don't. Some you just leave alone. We've had managers that would have been crazy to start giving instructions to because they just quit. And I wouldn't blame them because I'd be the same type myself. But a lot of people, people really do welcome direction and help, and particularly when they're getting it from somebody like Greg that really lives the life himself and doesn't just come down from high and say, here's what you do while I do something else. And a manager that behaves differently than what he's asking the people beneath them to behave, it just doesn't work over time. And people want a manager that they admire, and they're not going to admire him if those people profess to behave in one manner and behave in another manner. It's easier, this is a sad thing, but it's easier for an organization to see its quality move downward than it is upward. If the boss behaves badly, it causes everybody to behave. That is really catching. It's not as catching on the way in upper management, but if the manager is doing a lot of little things to grease his own situation, pretty soon, let's say you're running a retail establishment, pretty soon all the employees, or a lot of the employees, are telling their friends that they get a discount, with the retail operation, and if their friend wants something, they'll put it on their account and then get the discount. Once you start deviating downward, it is really contagious, and it is hard to rebuild. So you really need someone that behaves well on top and is not playing games for their own benefit. And we get a lot of managers that bend over backwards not to do that sort of thing, and then we get a few that bend over forwards. And if you get enough companies, you're going to get a lot of different forms of behavior, and Greg does something about it, and I've generally been lax in doing something about it, but he's done a way better job at that than I have.
紧接着，有年轻观众提出了一个关于伯克希尔能源公司环境影响的尖锐问题。他指出，路透社的调查发现，公司的燃煤电厂是全美最脏的，且没有明确的淘汰燃煤和全面转型可再生能源的计划。他作为将承受气候变化后果的年轻人，希望格雷格对此发表看法。
Thank you for both your question and your comments, because it is important to understand, say, Berkshire Hathaway Energy, but also how they operate, and maybe using Iowa at least as a starting example, because I think that was one of the states cited in the report. One of the important things that I'd say early in us acquiring our energy companies, and I go back to when we acquired Mid-American, we acquired it in 1999. Berkshire purchased Mid-American in 2000. But one thing that became very clear to myself and our teams was that what we do within our utilities is really driven in two fronts. One, we absolutely have to meet the requirements and the law that's laid out federally. But most importantly, we had to recognize we implement public policy across these states. And that was an interesting conversation when I go back to Iowa. And again, the report cited that as a significant problem. It was early in the 2000s when, for the first time in Iowa, we were going to, as a utility, be short power. So we didn't have the energy, and we entered into a significant discussion with our governor at the time, and really sat down and said, where do you want us to go as Mid-American? And what resources do you want as a state? And at that time, we were predominantly a coal-based state. And we recognized that, obviously, and fundamentally, personally viewed it as a risk, but we needed to have that conversation with our state, and as to how we would manage that going forward. The interesting thing was that as we had that conversation in the early 2000s, again, with the leadership of our state, it was clearly decided we wanted to continue to be long power, so i.e. not be short for our customers. We discussed the type of resource, and I remember a very clear conversation around we wanted to stay balanced across a variety of energy sources. And at that time, it was really coal and natural gas. And at that time, we made the decision to build the largest wind project in the U.S., in Iowa. So we undertook an effort to build three resources, a coal plant, a gas plant, and what was the first wind project we owned in Mid-American. And again, it was very consistent with what the state wanted, but we also laid some important groundwork there, because we started to define the importance of renewable energy, non-carbon resources, but it has to be consistent with what the state wanted. And we've gone on since that period of time to deploy $16 billion into Iowa associated with renewable energy. Again, very consistent with what our state wanted us to do, i.e. the underlying policy. We don't get to make that decision and just spend $16 billion. It's done in conjunction with our governors, our legislatures, our regulators. And at the same time, we've had the opportunity to retire 5 of the 10 coal units. Now, as the report highlighted, I understand people would like those other 5 coal units retired at this time. But to think we deployed $16 billion to retire 5, and it's a very good outcome for our customers. We've been able to maintain our rates. They're some of the lowest in the country. So it's been done very efficiently. But the reality is we still need those 5 coal units to keep the system stable. We cannot have a Spain-Portugal situation. So we absolutely respect the input, we absolutely respect the process, and we'll continue to work with each of our states to identify the path they would like to chart. And we work hard to ensure there's good, balanced outcomes, because we recognize the challenges they're associated with other folks' desires. So I think you'll continue to see our utilities implement policy consistent with the needs of their stakeholders or customers, and at the same time always respecting what's required by any of the federal standards. So thank you for your comments.
现在我们进入最后一部分，巴菲特分享他的人生智慧。首先，一位年轻的观众表达了自己对投资的兴趣，并希望巴菲特分享其职业生涯早期的关键教训，以及对年轻投资者如何发展投资哲学的建议。对这个问题，巴菲特是这么回答的。
Those are good questions. I wish I thought of them myself earlier in my life. Who you associate with is just enormously important, and don't expect that you'll make every decision right on that. I mean, but you are going to you're going to have your life progress in the general direction of the people that you work with, that you admire, that become your friends. I mentioned a few fellows that died in the last couple of years. Well, all of those people were people that if we were working together on something 1/10,000th the size of Berkshire, I mean, they'd be the kind of people you choose. They're people that make you want to be better than you are. And you want to hang out with people that are better than you are, and that you feel are better than you are, because you're going to go in the direction of the people that you associate with. And that's that's something you learn, and of course you learn it late in life. It's hard to really appreciate how important some of those factors are until you get much older. But when you've got people around you like Tom Murphy and just name him, Sandy Gottesman, Walter Scott, you're just going to live a better life than you do if you just go out and look at somebody that's making a lot of money and decide you're going to try and copy him or something of the sort. So I would try to be associated with smart people too, where I could learn a lot from them. And I would try to look for something that I would do if I didn't need the money. I mean, what you're really looking for in life is something where you've got a job that you'd hold if you didn't need the money. And I've had that. And Charlie had it for a very, very long time. In fact, all the fellows I named had it. And they also, every one of those ones I named, they always did more than their share. And they never sought more than their share of the credit. They just behaved as the way you'd like anybody you work with. And when you find them, you treasure them. And when you don't find them, you still keep doing whatever causes you to eat or enables you to eat. But you don't give up on looking around. And you'll find people do wonderful things for you. I mentioned earlier going down to Geico and knocking on the door when the door was locked. I mean, who knows what was behind that door? Like went in, but in 10 minutes I found that I had a man that was going to be just wonderfully helpful to me. And of course, if somebody's going to be helpful to you, you want to try to figure out ways to be helpful to them. So you get a compounding of good intentions and good behavior. And unfortunately, you can get the reverse of that in life too. And with a lot of, I was lucky in having a good environment for living that kind of a life. And other people, have a whole different environmental situation, they have to overcome it. But don't feel guilty about your good luck if you've got, if you live in the United States, there are 8 billion people in the world, and there's 330 million in the United States. You've already won the game to a great degree, and then just keep making the most of it. But you don't want to associate with people or enterprises that ask you to do something or tell you to do something that you shouldn't be doing. And that's one of the problems. I mean, different professions select for different types of people. And it's interesting to me that in the investment business, so many people get out of it after they've made a pile of money. That you really want something that you'll stick around for, whether you need the money. Greg doesn't need the money, Ajit doesn't need the money remotely. But they enjoy what they do, and they're so damn good at it. I've had the advantage of seeing how that works over time. The best manager I ever knew, and there's a lot of contention for who that would be, but actually was Tom Murphy Sr., who lived almost 98. And I've never seen anybody that could get the potential out of other people more than Murph could. I mean, if you wanted to become a better person, you went to work for Tom Murphy. And there are all kinds of successful people that really don't have that sort of, don't bring that to the party. And I'm not saying that's the only way to succeed, but I think it's the most pleasant way to succeed for sure. And I think that the Berkshire experience is pretty dramatic. I mean, to operate with Sandy Gottesman from 1963 until he died a couple years ago, Walter Scott for 30 years, and Craig operated with him for 25 years or so.
Right,
yeah,
30.
Yeah, you really can't miss. You'll learn all the time, but you'll not only learn how to be successful in business, you'll learn how to be successful in life. And so that's my recommendation. And for some reason, apparently you live longer too, because it's pretty amazing. I mean, these people I'm talking about, including myself, I like to attribute it to this and a few other things, but I think a happy person lives longer than somebody that's doing some things that they don't really admire that much in life.
下一位观众向巴菲特请教人生智慧，具体询问巴菲特是否经历过重大挫折或低谷，以及他是如何度过并克服这些困难的。对此，巴菲特说
Everybody gets setbacks, and some people have particularly bad luck in that respect, and others get through with fairly minors. But Charlie, he had setbacks. I had setbacks. I mean, it's part of life, and they're not any fun. I don't have any great advice for you about having the time of your life while you're having some major setback. But it comes with lifetime. You certainly have a setback when you die. And so everybody's got that setback guaranteed to them. But some people get, and I mean, it isn't a laughing matter in a sense, because, I mean, people get extraordinary bad luck, and other people get extraordinary good luck. Usually the people who get good luck don't really think it was so much luck as themselves, but you're just going to have it. I think that you're less likely to have it in terms of medical problems, in terms of various things in life. I mean, you were born at a good time. I mean, if you look all the way through the history of China, when would you rather have been born? 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, or now? It's just hands down, you'd be lucky. I mean, if I came from 20 generations of shepherds, I think I get kind of tired of my life just looking at these sheep every day. But we can sit here and I can watch Nebraska not quite play the same game of football that we played 20 years ago. But I mean, everything in life has been made so much better that you've got to figure that you do a lucky straw by staying in the womb for a couple 100,000 years and then just emerging at the right time. So I would focus on the things that have been good in your life rather than the bad things that happen, because bad things do happen. But it can often be a wonderful life. You could get terrible breaks in it. I mean, so far that really hasn't happened with me, but it's happened with some of my friends. But you get some bad breaks from time to time. But for 94 years, I've been able to drink whatever I want to drink, and they predict all kinds of terrible things for me, but it hasn't happened yet. So, and it's true. I mean, if you look at what pro football players are making now and everything compared to what they were making 30 or 40 years ago, you can say, well, isn't that wonderful? But if you look at the lifespan of professional athletes, after a while you get used to. You really decide that you're better off if you really weren't the first one chosen to be on the baseball team or the basketball team or anything else. The human body, well, Charlie and I think I speak for the others to some extent, that we never really exercised that much or did anything. We were carefully preserving ourselves for years. So look at the bright side of things to the extent that you can, and you're lucky enough you're here today. You're healthy. You come from a long distance, and you're getting a chance to learn more about something that interests you, and compare that with the situation a couple 100 years ago that you would have been offered. So anyway, that's enough moralizing.
下一个观众首先提到，巴菲特曾说过希望被铭记为一位老师，因此他向格雷格提问，希望他分享一个从巴菲特那里学到深刻教训的故事。同时他也反过来向巴菲特提问，希望了解巴菲特从格雷格身上学到了什么。
Greg, in just 1 second, but now the main thing I'd like to be known for is old age.
Well, Ward is obviously a remarkable teacher, and I benefit from that every day, and as I've already touched on, for many years. I'm fortunate that if I had to be remembered as something right now, obviously I'd want to be remembered as a great father, but equally a coach. And that goes to family, friends, and just being involved with the kids I coach in hockey or baseball or whatever it may be. I think we've got a great opportunity to give back to them at a very young age. So obviously those would be how I'd want to be remembered, and hopefully that'll be many, many years from now. But I love thinking of Warren truly as a teacher, and he's in every day get the opportunity to continue to learn. Warren and I, this dialogue is strong every week, and we're always talking around opportunities in Berkshire or things that are going on globally or in the U.S., and each one's truly a learning moment. I'll maybe go back to the very first meeting with Warren, and because it still stands out in my mind. Obviously, it was an incredible opportunity. Warren was buying or acquiring Mid-American Energy Holdings Company at that time, or thinking about it. And I had the opportunity with my partners to go over there on a Saturday morning, and we're discussing the business. And Warren had the financial statements in front of him. And like anybody, I was sort of expecting a few questions on how the business was performing or a variety of things, but Warren locked in immediately to what was on the balance sheet and the fact we had some derivative contracts, the weapons of mass destruction. And associated with the utility business, we do have them because they use them to match certain positions, and they're never matched perfectly, but you do have them, and we're required in the regulated business. But I just remember Warren going to it immediately and asking the composition of it and what was the underlying risk in it, and wanting to thoroughly understand it. It wasn't that big of a position, but it was absolutely one of the risks he was concerned about as he was acquiring Mid-American. And obviously in light of Enron and everything that had gone on, it was a very pertinent question. And then the follow-up to that was, then there's an energy crisis in the U.S. Around electricity and natural gas, and a variety of folks were making significant sums of money. This is a year, 18 months later. And Warren's follow-up question a couple of years later to me was, and I knew it was more just checking or testing, so how much money are we making during this energy crisis? Are we making a lot? Are the speculative positions in place, and are we making it? And the answer was, we're really not making any more today than we would have been 6 months ago, because all those derivatives were truly to support our business and weren't speculative. So just that focus on understanding the business of what he was acquiring, understanding the risks around it, still stand out in my mind. Warren?
Yeah, that's one thing we've really never talked about here, but I spend more time looking at balance sheets than I do income statements. And Wall Street really doesn't pay much attention to balance sheets, but I like to look at balance sheets over an 8 or 10 year period before I even look at the income account. Because there are certain things that's harder to hide or play games with on the balance sheet than you can with the income statement. And I mean, neither one gives you the total answer on anything, but you still ought to understand what the figures are saying, and what they don't say, and what they can't say, and what the management would like them to say that the auditors wouldn't like them to say. And I mean, there's just a lot to be learned, and you do learn more. You learn more from balance sheets, in my view, than most people give them credit for. In terms of, I really haven't. I'm not worried about being remembered about it. People don't remember. Well, they don't remember enough about Katharine Graham, for example, in terms of this story that shaped America in many ways. Certainly, it had just all kinds of impact. And I think, I mean, history is so fascinating. And Charlie was probably the best person you could imagine in what he learned. Charlie was never satisfied with just superficial things about any subject. He really wanted to understand it. And he always would tell me that, don't take a position on anything until you can describe the arguments against it better than the person who is arguing with you, that you should be able to argue their case better than they can. He was a remarkable teacher, and but so were those other fellows I mentioned. I've had and of course my dad was an incredible teacher. So you make the most of the people you meet that are going to make you a better person, and probably forget about the rest to quite an extent.
下面一个不是问题，而是私人请求，有点疯狂粉丝的感觉。先是讲一大堆巴菲特本人的坚持不懈的故事，接着提起自己15岁时就曾写信给巴菲特请求见面，但被婉拒。他指出，巴菲特当年预估自己还有3000天生命，但现在已经过去了5000天了，因此想再次请求巴菲特，希望他能拨出1小时给自己。对付这样的问题，巴菲特自然是轻车熟路。
Thank you, and I will say this: granted hour to everybody of the 40,000 here. Well, I'll have an interesting time the rest of my life. But I'll give you one tip. I found that when I was very young, and I would drive around to various companies all over the country, and because I was very young, and these were companies were offbeat, and they didn't have investor relations departments then, almost every CEO would see me because they figured they'd never see me again, and they weren't getting calls like that. And I would ask them 2 questions. I would explain to them, it's not a bad idea, incidentally. If you're going to walk into somebody's office and you say you want 10 minutes of their time, take a hourglass and stick it on the desk of the person you're talking to and turn it up. So it's going to go for 10 minutes, and you say you're going to leave in 10 minutes unless they ask you to stay. And that's the terms. But then once you have that, if they're in the coal business, we'll say, which happened to be one that I was interested in 70 years ago or so, you just ask them one question that if they were to be stuck on a desert island and they had to own only one of their competitors' stock during the 10 years they were going to be on that island, which one would it be and why? And then after they give you that answer, you said the same thing. If you were going to short your net worth while you were on that island, which would it be and why? Because every manager likes to talk about their competitors. They're like a bunch of school kids, you know, when they get into talking about their competitors. And I probably learned more about various industries by just making sure that they didn't think I'd stay too long, and that in the meantime they would have the floor and talk about their competitors. I kept my own mouth shut in those days. That's a lesson I've lost somewhere along the line. But you essentially, they've outsourced, or I shouldn't say outsourced, but they've departmentalized investor relations of all companies of size practically now. So you've got 3,000 companies or whatever they have, and they all have departments. And each one of them has an investor relations department practically. And their job is to say, this is the best thing you can do today is buy our stock. Well, the whole concept is total idiocy. But it's a big business and it gets bigger, and the investor relations department gets bigger, and it's what we have now. But do a little of your own work, your own way. But Berkshire Hathaway has got plenty of material out there for you to read, and when you get through reading it all, you'll know way more than most of the people that work at Berkshire. So you don't need a personal interview. If we take an hour times even the 40,000 people we may have here, plus Becky's many listeners and viewers, it just doesn't work. So I admire your effort, but you'll just have to settle for that as the admiration that you get in this. Okay.
下一个问题是问，如果希望未来加入伯克希尔，需要具备哪些基本要素和知识？
Yes, well, I think your dad said it best. He highlighted that to become part of Berkshire, to own some Berkshire shares, you're going to have to work hard. And I think hard work takes all of us a long ways in life. And I would never diminish that. There's a lot of things that matter in life, but if you start with a great work ethic and have that attitude that you want to contribute, you're going to go a long ways in life, and you'll find great enjoyment, because as Warren said, you'll then, if you work hard, you're going to find the things you love in life, and it'll lead to that. And we truly look forward to the day you're part of Berkshire. Thank you.
Yeah. Keep a lot of curiosity and read a lot, as Charlie would say.
又一位年轻人向巴菲特提问，想知道高中时期是否有特定的课程或活动对他后来的投资生涯产生了重要影响。对此，巴菲特说
That's a good question. The teachers you get in your life have this incredible impression on you, and a lot of it are the formal teachers you have, but some are informal teachers too. I mean, I've learned from certain employers, so much. You really hope you're learning from everybody you find who's well-intentioned and has had a lot of experience, and I had a lot of good luck in that. But I would say that where I was really lucky was my dad was in the investment business. So I would go down on Saturday and I'd wait for him to go to lunch with, and I'd read the books that were around there that nobody else ever read. And they talked to me, numbers talked to me. I could never get my fill of them, and then I discovered the public library, and I read every book there was on investments, literally, in the Omaha Public Library at 19th and Harney. And I enjoyed learning about that. I'm like Charlie. If Charlie was reading about electricity, he would want to have known everything that Thomas Edison knew and more, and go through the same thought processes and understand how everything worked. I didn't care how it worked. I just cared whether it worked. And that's a limitation. I'm confessing here. I'm not bragging. But as Charlie would say, I mean, people would always say, if you could only have lunch with one person living or dead, who would it be? And Charlie said, I've already had lunch with all of them because I've read all their books, basically. And he really did it. I think having curiosity and actually finding sympathetic teachers is very useful. I ran into a couple of teachers that, both in high school and college. In fact, I would say that I went to three different universities, and I went to high school in Washington, and at each place, I found about 2 or 3 really outstanding people, and I just spent my time with them and didn't pay much attention to the other classes. And I was lucky to find something that really fit me very early on. If my ambition had been to become a ventriloquist or whatever the hell it might have been, it would have worked. I'd just spent hours and hours and hours, and I would have been any good when I got through. So I don't believe that. I think there was that book that talked about spending 10,000 hours or something. I just spent 10,000 hours at tap dancing, and you'd throw up if you watched me, But if I spent 10 hours reading Ben Graham, I would be damn smart when I got through. So minds are really, really different. I watch great bridge players, and I watch great physicians. People really, really, really have different talents. And I don't know. I think you're supposed to have 88 billion cells in your brain. I'm not sure that all of mine are flashing bright lights, but you are different than anybody else. That's what my dad always used to tell me, that essentially that you're something different. It may not be good at the moment, but you find your own path, and you will find the people in schooling that want to talk to you. People that teach, in general, they love having a young student who's actually really interested in the subject, and they'll spend extra time with you. They'll do all kinds of things and I ran into that. I had Graham and Dodd at Columbia. Well, Dave Dodd treated me like a son, basically, but I was interested. Excuse me, I was interested in what they were saying, and they found it kind of entertaining. And I was so interested, so I would just I would look around at who what really fascinates you. I wouldn't try and be somebody else, and then I would. You'll find the teachers at a school, and you'll find some outstanding people that are teachers. I've had at least 10 people that have had huge impacts on my life, and every one of them was positive, because I got to select in a sense, and a number of people really like helping younger people. I found that in school, and probably helps to look a little bit lost and all that. Like you need help, but I would say my school experiences were good, but were really very good. But I attribute it much more to the individual than to the institutions.
好的，这就是年会上的32个问题。谢谢，再见。
And thanks for coming.